Afternoon, everyone. The March 31st, 2026 regular council meeting is called to order at 4 o'clock. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelet on whose traditional territories the district of Ucluelet operates. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. There is one late item. Has everyone got it? Great. May I have a motion to amend the March 31st, 2026 regular council meeting agenda by adding the late item titled Closed Session, Section 90, brackets 1, brackets A, brackets C, brackets E, brackets G of the Community Charter as item number 13, and to renumber the remaining items accordingly.
So moved.
Councillor Hoare, Councillor Anderson seconds. All in favor? None opposed? That carries. May I have a motion to adopt the March 31st, 2026 regular council meeting agenda as amended?
So moved.
Councillor Hoare, Councillor Mafty, all in favor? None opposed? That carries. We have two sets of meeting minutes for adoption. Are there any errors or omissions for either of these meeting minutes?
One small omission.
Which set?
On the March 17th minutes. It's page 9 of our agenda right at the top. We had a recess and we reconvened from the recess at 5. I don't know, maybe it was called at 5:12, but we don't actually have an end time. So,
okay, we'll call it 5:17. How about it?
There you go. As I said, minor.
Perfect. Okay, so I will move that the minutes of March 17th, 2026 regular council meeting be adopted as amended.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Are there any errors or omissions from March 24th meeting minutes? Seeing none, I'll move that the minutes of March 24th, 2026 special council meeting and public hearing be adopted as presented.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. All in favor? None opposed? That carries. We have one delegation on the agenda today. The delegation is from the Alberni-Clayoquot Health Network regarding annual summary of AHCN activities, introduction to the ACHN Poverty Reduction Data Updates Report. Welcome, Marcy.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Just give it a moment as the presentation gets queued up. So as most of you know, my name is Marcy DeWitt. I am the coordinator for the Alberni-Clayoquot Health Network. There we go. I don't know, does this work? So the ACHN is a multidisciplinary network that has been functioning in the Alberni-Clayoquot since around 2011. We really gained momentum and kind of came into our own in about 2015 and started receiving funding from Island Health in 2012. We are a network that addresses the social determinants of health across the Alberni-Clayoquot, working with the Alberni Valley, Barclay communities, as well as the West Coast communities. And it's always my pleasure to come out to each one of the local governments every year to give a quick update on what we've been up to for the year and what we have planned, as well as many of the data products that we are developing in order for you to help make decisions in community. So as I mentioned, we receive annual funding from Island Health in order to address the social determinants of health. So while Island Health is working on acute health and health services, we are looking at the upstream functions of what makes us healthy and unhealthy in our communities. So all of these root causes of poor health, everything from housing to social connections. Our network is primarily made up of folks from across the region. So we strive to have good representation from all of our local governments, as well as representation from across the region. We have a great group of people helping to make our decisions at our table of partners, which is really our leadership table. And then we really focus in on engaging community well. So we do that through issue-specific action tables, the network, which is allied health professionals and other networks doing similar work, as well as the community. So we're constantly going out for community stories, ensuring that we're doing good community engagement, and collecting that information for the purposes of seeding other conversations and crossing between that information between networks. All right, we're having a slight delay in the slides. There we go. Oh, now we've skipped ahead. There we are. So over the past 11 years that I've been coordinator, we've seen a strong kind of building of momentum. We have a reputation and a history of convening around implementation of projects. So having that capacity to bring community partners and stakeholders together to actually implement the solutions that we've been identifying as being able to target the key facets of good health in our communities. And we have a nimbleness because we are a network that's hosted through the regional district. We have an ability to apply on funds that other organizations do not, as well as to pivot to meet the emerging needs of our communities. So over the past 10 years, we've seen a lot of various different accomplishments, but really focusing in on being able to convene regional stakeholders and take actions that those of us just kind of in our individual silos couldn't have done otherwise. Building on that success, we can do this, but we can't operate the projector. Hold on. There we go. We developed our 2014 strategic plan. And in this plan, we made very specific decisions to focus in on what was mattering. So really looking at our 2022 poverty reduction action plan. We wanted to center all of our work around around what was identified within the poverty reduction plan, and then really look at the ways that we are supporting that. So networking the networks, doing our network development, ensuring that we're creating good relationships so that we can convene around situations fast, as well as focusing in on our communications and engagement, ensuring that not only are we collecting good data and communicating that in meaningful ways to community, but we're also collecting stories from community and ensuring that we're accurately reflecting how the community is experiencing specific issues that we're talking about. It's one button. There we go. So network development, as I mentioned, we do a lot of work around networking the networks. New this year, this past year, I guess, we've also created an executive committee to better support me, moving away from a co-chair and predominantly chair, I guess, roles within the network, and looking more at a group of 4 individuals that are supporting with contracts and advice towards the coordinator. We've also seeded a new network in the Alberni Valley to look at, I guess, reducing duplication and continuum of care within that region. And then just looking at different ways that we can seed other projects. So our network development goal area is always very much high level, looking at ensuring that our relationships are strong. But moving into the meat and potatoes, our poverty reduction work. I mentioned our 2022 Building Prosperity in the Alberni Klekwat Poverty Reduction Action Plan. And since the launch of that project, we've had a variety of different, I guess, different ways that we've gone with this, working both with around transportation and access, around youth capacity and convening. And then this year, we've also just launched our data updates for this plan. So recognizing that the plan was launched just as the new census information came out, we wanted to ensure that that information was updated. And we have included that information for you in your agenda package. So we do plan to update this again every 2 years in line with census. So we'll have a 2027 data update as well. But we really focused in on any of the newest data around income, housing, childcare, and health. So some of those key areas that we know that we've seen a lot of change within our communities. Income and income equity is one of those priority areas that we didn't often see a lot of opportunities in. But this year, we started really looking at better data pieces. So for the Alberni Valley, we worked with BC Policy Solutions and Living Wage BC to calculate the 2025 Alberni Valley living wage. And then we were also successful in launching with INEO a self-employment pilot for folks in the Alberni Klekwat region. And we'll now just be kind of pursuing some opportunities around social finance and social finance research in order to better support the region around bringing in unconventional forms of finance into community projects. So one of the areas that we didn't think that we had a lot of inroads is now showing quite a few different ways that we're going to be kind of working forward around income and income equity. And we're all familiar with the transportation and access successes of both the health network as well as the region. We have committed this year to continued advocacy and work around intercommunity access, both in the Alberni Valley as well as from the West Coast through to the east side of the island. Working with partners in the Alberni Valley to see a connection to Oceanside, as well as just some strengthening of BC Transit lines, but starting the slow process of looking at our intercommunity transit from the West Coast to Port Alberni, which is a legislative nightmare, but also something that we can continue to do the research and slowly push towards seeing some solutions. And lastly, this year we did wrap up our Communities Building Youth Futures support to our youth facilitators in the Barclay communities and the West Coast. But we're successful working with ADAPS in Port Alberni in our application to a Foundry Center. So we now have an Alberni Valley's Foundry and have secured West Coast satellite services as well. And with some additional advocacy, now have a youth navigation position here dedicated on the West Coast. So that kind of legacy project has kind of paid off in terms of local capacity and the amount of services that we have available for youth now. So as we move forward, on the horizon for 2026. I mentioned some of these kind of evolving income equity opportunities that we've seen just kind of popping up in the last month. We are doing quite a lot of work and will be planning to do quite a lot of work around healthcare recruitment and retention, working with local partners, both in the Alberni Valley and in the West Coast. And just moving along with our normal pieces, looking at living wage and poverty reduction presentations, and some additional community communications development in the near future. So thanks for your time today. Always happy to give a quick update and then add a few extra pages of data to your agenda packages. I'm happy to answer any questions about those data pieces, and please keep in touch if you have questions, because I have files of additional supplementary information from those pieces.
Great. Thank you, Marcy. Can you elaborate on your efforts with the transportation between here and Port Alberni and or Oceanside?
Yeah, so from Port Alberni to Oceanside is much simpler. It is a BC Transit initiative. There is already pre-planning in the works. It has been included in the BC Transit Master Plan. Again, we're running into complications with the federal or the BC budget. There isn't a lot of new funding for projects such as that. But there has already been that clearing for the needs assessments, as well as any additional costing towards that.
And what about from the West Coast to Port Alberni?
So complicated. So I am just really starting to get a sense of what that looks like, ensuring that we're keeping that in front of our MLA and MP as a high priority item. But with the licensing and the legislation and the insurance, it's always been a really tricky piece to piece together.
Great. And is there a service right now of some sort that isn't really compatible with our service?
As far as travel between the West Coast and I don't know. They just keep popping up and I'm having a hard time keeping track, Marilyn.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Madame Mayor. Um, it's really been an emergent issue since COVID.
Right. Yeah, it's probably the biggest complaint that I hear regularly from people. Yeah. Well, keep up the good work. Any questions from council? Comments, questions? Councillor Anderson?
I am, thank you very much, Mr. Witt. Yeah, no, I'm biased because I'm on the table of partners with the ACHN, and I think it's great. It took me a while to get my head around what it was because there's so many things, so many hats that you're wearing at this and it even took me a while to figure out all the different things and how it fits together. But at the end of the day, like things like social determinants of health, when you see all the people that are in this group, in this network that when we meet, it really does make a difference. And there's to take advantage of this really is a smart way to go, because even though we can get the census data or we can have things like a provincial housing needs report, to have the ACHN break down those numbers and what they mean and what our local people are looking for, who can afford what, and the poverty reduction one pager that you sent me was really important because it really differentiates like what people are looking for. Like there is definitely some supportive, but just if we're going to be making decisions about land use and affordable housing, like that really fills in that gap for me. And another example of a really a pertinent one was the seniors advocate getting Dan Levitt. The mayor was on that call, and that was terrific. So I think there's enough people in that group with a family coalition. We've got Brookwood. We've got so many really important people from all over the Alberni Valley and here that we can start to kind of flush out like really tough problems, like losing some of those seniors beds up in Tofino and things like that. So it's yeah, at first it was hard for me to get my head around because there's so many parts to this, and now I'm realizing how important that it is. So thank you for wearing all those hats and doing all that. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Anyone else? Comments, questions? No? Well, thank you for your presentation. We always enjoy them. And you're welcome to stay for the meeting or not. Is there any unfinished business? All right, there are 5 reports on the agenda. The first report is titled Proposal for a 1-Year Nordic Sauna Pilot at Big Beach Park, and it will be presented by Tyler Brown, Director of Planning and Strategic Initiatives. Mr. Brown.
Good evening, Mayor, and good evening, Council. This is a different one we're bringing you, and it had an interesting genesis. We originally got a inquiry from BlackRock and Wildwood Saunas about the potential for a temporary use permit for a sauna on the BlackRock property. Upon some further investigation, the area that was identified, some survey work actually showed that the property being proposed or being looked at for this use, for this proposal, wasn't actually on the BlackRock property. It was part of Big Beach Park and has been utilized for some time. It's a mostly cleared area for different gatherings over Big Beach Park. So what was initially looking into TUP has kind of evolved into what we need to consider it, and that is license of use for parkland within Big Beach Park. The proposal is for a mobile sauna. I believe council is probably familiar with the setup in other places, but the proponent will go into a little more details with some diagrams of what the business is here in a moment. But it is a fairly small footprint. I believe the sauna is 8 foot by 12 foot. A couple cold plunge, and surrounding gazebo for the use. So this would be it's being proposed for within Big Beach Park. However, all access to it, all parking, all administration would be through the BlackRock property. That includes, just want to be very clear, that would include the parking elements of it. So really the intended entrance and exit would all be through the BlackRock property. I can go into a little bit more detail, but I'll leave that to the proponent. Essentially, from the legal perspective, we would need to, if council wishes to proceed with this idea and endorse it in principle, staff would go away, work with the proponent to develop a fee structure for the use of the park. From staff's perspective, we would only be proposing to treat this as a pilot project, just to get, it's fairly new for the district with this type of use, especially in parkland, and go from there, and then bring that proposal back to council for final consideration and execution, if that's what council decides. The zoning, the park zoning does permit commercial use within the parkland, and this is not an uncommon item in other jurisdictions where there is commercial, sometimes very temporary, and sometimes a longer term use used in parkland. So that's what's before you, and I will now turn it over to the proponent, Mr. Lovering, I believe is online there, that can provide you a little more details on what Wildwood Saunas is proposing.
Hey there, my name is Josh Dupuy. I'm the owner and founder of Wildwood Saunas. We have put a little presentation together with some slides to show what we're looking at getting set up over there, and the potential partnership with the city of Ucluelet and BlackRock Resort. Just gonna share my screen. My apologies, I am not familiar with this setup. Can you guys see the presentation?
Yes,
Perfect.
we can.
Thank you very much. So a little bit about Wildwood Saunas. Wildwood Saunas was founded in 2020 from a passion for the sauna culture and desire to share it with others. We began as a handcrafted mobile sauna brought to the beach where people could gather and enjoy sauna and cold plunging. Since it's grown into building custom saunas for homes and community focused on wellness spaces. We had our team, myself, Josh Dupuy, the founder. This is Jonathan Lovering, our general manager. And then Lori Cooper, our location manager at the spot at the junction. And then Brian Pridham, he's a sauna host at Bilston Creek Farms here in Victoria. Our vision for Uculit is to create a welcoming community sauna experiences that support health, connection, and calm. By providing kind, reliable service and thoughtfully crafted sauna space with fair pricing. We aim to create a place where individuals, families, and community can slow down, reconnect, and build lasting wellness traditions. This is the current setup that we have at the junction right now, and we would have to move a few things around to make it fit the space at Big Beach, which includes turning the current sauna into an electric sauna, but that kind of gives a nice visual. And this was a quick mock-up just to show roughly what we would be looking to do. It could change, the size could change a bit, but that is kind of the layout we're looking at. And this is roughly where we would back up the sauna that would show the best view of the beach and stuff like that. And then we have the BlackRock guests would be able to use the sauna as well as the public. And that's the path down to the sauna space. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Dupuy. Are you open for some questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I have a couple myself. The report in our agenda says that you're looking to relocate what's currently out at Surf Junction to Big Beach Park. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah, we would. Yeah.
Right. And although it's a portable sauna, you're looking to actually build some, like a deck and a couple of 2 cold plunge tubs and a propane fire table with seating. So it's, the whole thing is not completely portable. It's actually going to stay there.
Yeah, we're thinking kind of a ground level deck on, set on patio stones kind of thing. The sauna itself would be mobile, like still on wheels. And yeah, we can make, kind of made in a way that it could be taken away and dismantled pretty easily, but not completely mobile. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then question for Mr. Brown, because this is not a disposition of land, we don't need to provide public notice, is that right?
Correct. If there's a disposition of land, the legislation is very clear that there's a process that needs to be followed. This would definitely not be a disposition of land. It would just be a temporary use of that space.
So rather than a temporary use permit, this is a 1-year pilot project.
Mayor, that's a good question. So temporary use permit is where the zoning does not permit the use. In this case, the park zoning or the zoning that is on Big Beach Park does allow for commercial and non-commercial uses to occur. So there's actually no really land use approval needed here other than it is park and it would need the license of use.
Great, thank you. Questions from councillors? Councillor Mafty?
I'm just curious how much does it cost to use the sauna? Like if I want to go to the sauna for a 90 minute session, what's the rate?
We're thinking somewhere around $50. And that would include, we're trying to we could create some kind of more upscale service in Junction, kind of to fit the brand of the hotel better. So you get a robe, your towels, all that kind of stuff when you come to the space. And that was kind of the price point we're looking at, but we're, willing to work with you guys on what would work better for the space. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions from council? Question for Mr. Brown. Staff, if this goes through, the staff would work with the proponent to develop a fee for the use of the parkland.
That's correct, Mayor. There's a couple ways that can be done. And we've gotten legal advice in that regard. We could do an appraisal to determine kind of what fair market use of that would be and set the rent accordingly. There's other options that are used in other jurisdictions where a percentage of sales is agreed upon, or a combination of the two that works for the proponent, but also ensures that there's adequate compensation for the use of a public amenity.
Great, thank you for that clarification. No other questions? There are two recommendations, actually. Councillor Anderson?
I will move that council approve the Wildwood Saunas Inc. Nordic Sauna Experience at Big Beach Park in principle as a 1-year pilot project with all access through Black Rock Resort. Separately, altogether.
Separately, I think.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? Councillor Noel?
Hey, thank you, Worship. No, I love it. I think it's great. I think these guys, they've been at the Junction and just trying to get some momentum. I'm an avid cold plunger myself. It's wonderful to think that they're coming into Black Rock. I think it's a wonderful fit for the community, and not just for the tourists, but I think for locals. And I'm really looking forward to it. And I know Lori, the local manager, she's very committed to this, and I do appreciate that there was a very clear laid out map showing that the footprint. It's already a flattened area, so there isn't much of a disturbance going on. So I think it's a big win for the sauna group that's doing this, as well as for Black Rock and the rest of the community. So I'm 100% supportive of this.
Thanks for your comments. Any further discussion?
I'll jump in. I'll preface this by saying I'm a huge sauna fan, cold plunge fan. I think the company's great. I like the proposal. Where I'm struggling on principle. We just had the last meeting we had a big debate about the value of Big Beach Park, and to me, my concern isn't with this particular proposal. That frankly, I think it looks really good, and I think it is a good fit. But my concern is that it's the thin end of the wedge, and I know what's happened. Beaches in Tofino, areas in Tofino where a business comes in, it's a 1-year pilot, they get approved, of course, and then another business comes in, and slowly we commodify what is public space, and right now that space is it's available to everyone. It's there for the whole community. It's accessible to everyone, and more than just the people. It's also a strip of wilderness. It's whether we call it wilderness or not, it's a strip of natural habitat. I understand that the site's been disturbed and all that, so I just have a problem allocating this use in that space, and it would be the case for there wouldn't be a single commercial use like a long-term commercial use like this that I could get behind if it was a one-time thing. It's a completely different scenario, but to have a business that's based in the park, it just seems problematic to me, and I'm wondering if there's any other alternative. So at the time and this is maybe a question now for the proponent, at the time that you guys approached Black Rock and thought that this was the space, realized that it wasn't, is there space on the Black Rock Resort property to host this? Like, does it have to be here? Is there an alternative location? I'd love to see the project go. I feel like I'll just ask the question and then maybe get an answer from whomever. I realize you're here. You're here.
Maybe the dog park.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's we kind of walked the property with BlackRock and checked out different areas and stuff like that. that was really the best location to put something like this, just because of, there was either not enough space or it was kind of too close to, the other stuff or the buildings, and there wasn't power or whatever. There was different reasons, but yeah, ultimately we kind of ended up putting, saying, okay, well, this would work here, and just kind of went with it to see to see if we could get it, you know, get it to go.
Mr. Harding, you're familiar with Nanaimo parks and uses in park space. It seems to be a fairly common thing in larger municipalities. Is that right?
Mayor, yes, there is, and the debate is always similar to Councillor Maftee's. What's right for the certain park, certain area. And again, with this one, is people thought it was Black Rock property up until the time we did the survey and realized it was actually part of Big Beach. But these kind of debates in regards to commercial uses, but yes, a variety of parks have very many, as your local national park has many different types of uses, as do many municipal parks have different uses within them.
Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it feels I want to be really clear. I have nothing but support and goodwill for this proponent and for the business, and like I really wish them the best. But I just see such a slippery slope to commodifying Big Beach Park, to commodifying the wilderness that we have here, and to sort of open the door seems problematic. I think that we have enough businesses, we have enough tourist businesses, we have enough alternatives that to start, jamming stuff into Big Beach Park. Just I don't feel good about it. I feel good about the way the park is today, the way it's used today, the way it's accessible to all, as a place to come and get close to nature. I realize this isn't, a nightclub, and I completely appreciate that it's probably a pretty good fit as far as businesses go. But just in general principle, I can't support it. I don't know how anyone else is going to vote, but I want to make it clear that I have nothing against the business, and I really hope that there is a plan B, or there's something else that works, because I'd be there. I love saunas.
So this is a 1-year pilot project, which does give the opportunity to say, hey, this isn't working, or yeah, it's working really well. Councillor Anderson?
Well, I'll jump in. I hear exactly what you're saying, and I understand where you're coming from, and the slippery slope. And when I was reading that, I felt reassured that when I started, you're reading that it's going to be a pilot for 1 year. It's not a land disposition, and it's something that council it's sort of the decision of council, so that we can make sure, like, we're not giving something away and then we don't have control over it. It's something that we could oversee. The other part of that is sometimes it depends. And I know this is, again, if you have different businesses, does it depend on the business? Is it a margarita bar? I would love a margarita bar, but it may be not appropriate at all. But at the same time, when I think about what the offer is, and that, and again, I don't want to cherry pick businesses, but I think in this particular case, because it's so based in wellness, and to people to be able to go down and experience that Big Beach, especially when it's kind of those cold days that are just no one wants to go down there, that to be able to do a cold plunge and a sauna down there would be such a really interesting experience, to experience Ucluelet, and go out and look at the water like that is just kind of, it's something that I think promotes that sort of wellness, which is, I think, the direction that we're going as a community. And I think they draw people here based on that. I definitely hear what you're saying now, but I think because we have that ultimate control and it is a temporary pilot, I think it makes sense to me. And that made me feel better about that initial feeling that you're talking about. That's my side.
I know I've wanted to try the one out at Surf Junction ever since I've talked to Lori about it. And it's just not sort of top of mind because it's at the junction. And so I would be far more prone to try it if it was here at Big Beach and just, 5 minutes away from my house. But that's, yeah, that's how I think it would be a good fit there. Councillor Hoare, anything from you?
I definitely agree it's a good fit, and I fully support the sauna thing, but I have to agree with Councillor Maftee about the thin edge of the wedge. And it's sure, it's a mobile option, sure, it's a 1-year temporary, but it's not going to be completely mobile. Increasing the traffic on the site, and it is parkland. It should be parkland. And increasing the traffic and increasing the, having structures built on it, does cause damage to the roots of the trees, that are there. No matter how carefully you design it, that is bound to happen. If it were on BlackRock land and we had any say in it, I would 100% be behind it, but it's on the parkland, and I feel really strongly about the park.
Yeah, I think it's because the BlackRock property is sloped, and so they've chosen a spot that is flat and has been previously disturbed, and probably is the easiest place to build the little deck and the structure there, is what I'm guessing.
I think that all makes sense, but to put it into perspective, if the proposal was to put this at the access point, like where the Wild Pacific Trail comes down, like right across the street here, I think it would be a whole different story. And you'd say, well, hang on, how does that fit with the intended use? And I think in this case, it's just the fact that it's so proximate to BlackRock that it's, fair enough. People even thought it was part of BlackRock, but that doesn't mean that we should just sort of treat it as an aside. That land was designated as parkland. And I think that if we start, it's going to be difficult to stop. And I don't want to disagree with Councillor Anderson's point, because I completely understand where he's coming from. That's how people want to experience Ucluelet. But if that's what we keep pushing for, and that's what we keep proposing, and that's what we keep approving, then that's all we're going to have. And the people who want to come to Ucluelet to appreciate wilderness, maybe the people who want to come down to the beach and do a cold plunge and run into the ocean, they're not going to be able to do that. And we don't need to look very far to see what beaches look like when you have businesses cheek by jowl. And it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen during a 1-year trial. It happens year after year after year after year when there are commercial interests that say, hey, this would be a really good fit here. And next thing you know, it's no longer a wild natural beach with wildlife and big trees. It's it's a great view with 5 businesses, one beside the other. BlackRock's already there, has great amenities, great facilities, and I go to BlackRock and I like to sit inside and have a drink and look out the window, but I also like to go to Big Beach and hear the surf and watch the birds and see what's happening in nature. So again, for me, it's a tricky one. What's next? There's going to be something that comes. Oh, why don't we have a food truck down there? People really want a food truck. People want to experience Ucluelet, and they want to have a hot dog by the beach. And 10 years down the road, we'll be revisiting the pub, and everyone will say, that's great.
You just need to keep getting reelected. That's all.
I doubt that's going to happen, but as long as I'm here, that's my 2 cents. And I don't want to further influence anyone, and I also really don't want to come off as critical of the business. Again, I think it's great. I just wish that there was a place to do it where it fit a little bit better aligned with another business. And I appreciate if there's no room at BlackRock, that's the way she goes. But I don't know that we should be putting it in Big Beach Park just because it fits there.
Any further comments?
I would just
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, just through the mayor really, really quick. Yeah, I know I think at the end of the day, I love the fact that Councillor Hoare and Councillor Mafty are such good advocates for the natural setting here. And it would be worse if there were people that were the opposite. Like if it's not it's a good problem to have if you have people that's they're really steadfast about that, and it's might be hard to sometimes get things through when people have business ideas. I would rather have it go that way for sure. But I just think in this, I'm landing obviously on the side where I think that there's this extension, what they thought was their property. And I know, this is park, but it's sort of abutted up to their zone. If it had been like sort of gratuitously right at the end of the trail or something, obviously that would be different for me. But yeah, I think in the interest of having that experience and because it is mobile for the most part. And I would hope it doesn't do irreparable damage to the ground there. But yeah, I feel that it's not so bad. But at the end of the day, I hear your concern and both of your concerns, and I think that's having a couple of people on council that feel that way. I think is a gift, and I celebrate that as well. So I appreciate both sides here.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion before we vote? No, seeing none. So all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. So that was the first of the two recommendations. Councillor Anderson, did you want to carry on with the second one?
Yeah, I'll proceed here. I'll further move that staff be directed to work with the applicant on determining a lease rate and report back to council with a final license of use agreement for council's consideration and execution.
And do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion on that one? No, seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. We had a couple of abstainers on that one, so that'll be interesting to have that conversation later. The next report is titled Zoning Bylaw Refresh.
If you don't mind, Your Worship, I had a little glitch here and things froze up on me. What was the decision on that?
It went through.
Okay.
You were abstaining. I didn't realize you were frozen. I thought you were
Yeah, I
abstaining,
was frozen in time.
That's okay. Abstention means yes, so it's okay.
Thank you.
The next report is titled Zoning Bylaw Refresh, What We Learned Report, and it will be once again presented by Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn this over very quickly to Nancy Henderson and Aaron Penner from Urban Systems, and they'll go over what we've heard through the initial engagement. But I just want to quickly say, as you're aware, we had the open house, we had the survey, and both were very well attended, and the survey had a lot of input. So that really helps in a project like this, especially on the timeline that we're working on. And so just a big thank you to the community for their participation in that, because it is very useful. So you'll see the result, you've seen the results, and we'll have a little bit of analysis here for you to consider as well. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Penner and Mrs. Henderson. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I'll start us off with the What We Learned report summary that's provided in your council report as well. Provide an overview of the engagement, who we heard from, what we learned, and then also about the development community meeting that we had, and then get into the next steps. This What We Learned report is also, carried through in the next two agenda items as well, and had a significant influence on the options and recommendations provided to council. In terms of the community engagement events, one thing I have to say is, further to Mr. Brown, it was very remarkable how engaged the community was. We did a survey from the beginning of February to March 1st with 291 responses. These types of numbers reflect what we often see in communities 10 times your size. So it's very excellent response rate from the community. The survey was mostly focused on what you're seeing tonight in terms of the gentle density housing options and short-term rentals. We had some questions around on-site amenities for multi-unit housing developments, and we're going to come back to you with another report on the multi-unit pre-zoning at a future date. Then we had the open house on February 23rd with 102 participants. People were there, as soon as the doors opened and a little bit after even the time that we had. And they're very meaningful conversations. Like there was a lot of conversations, a lot of people staying there for quite a long time, and some people even coming twice. We had additional boards at the engagement event than we did and topics than we did in the survey based on council's input when our colleagues Brittany and Kara presented to you regarding the zoning bylaw refresh. So there was some good engagement on the greater zoning bylaw project as well. And then the next morning we met with the development community and we had a great conversation sort of regarding the interpretation issues and sort of issues they've had with the zoning bylaw. There was a lot of real excitement with the direction that the district is going in terms of working to improve the interpretation issues of the zoning bylaw, and moreover, just sort of a different culture and mindset regarding working with the development community. So I think they were quite excited about what they were seeing in Ucluelet. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Aaron to take us through the details of what we learned.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. So in terms of who responded to the survey, a large proportion of respondents were are current residents of Ucluelet with 77%. The remainder were some part-time seasonal residents at 10%, some people that own businesses here but don't necessarily live in the district, some people that commute to Ucluelet but don't necessarily live here, and then some visitors. A very large proportion of the survey were long-term residents, survey respondents. So 50% have been connected to Ucluelet for over 10 years, another 27%, 6 to 10 years, and the remaining roughly 25%, some were shorter than that, some were longer than that. 78% of respondents are homeowners versus about 17% renters. And a little under half of respondents lived in households without children, and a little over half were between the ages of 35 to 54. As Nancy mentioned earlier, there was a high response rate with 291 responses, and what that translates to is approximately 11% of the current 2026 population that's aged 15% and older, which again is a response rate that I don't think I've seen yet in my career on a survey. In terms of some of the details and some of the questions we asked about, we wanted to get a better understanding of Ucluelet residents' perceived challenges and benefits of short-term rentals in the community. So a little under half currently think there are too many short-term rentals in the district. And then the remaining responses were mixed. Some think that it's about right, about 1 in 4, about 1 in 10 think there aren't enough, and about a quarter of respondents aren't quite sure or didn't provide comment on that. Some of the most common perceived benefits that we heard across the board were that people rely on short-term rentals as mortgage helpers. They contribute to the success of local businesses and are crucial to the local economy. Some of the common challenges were impacts to the long-term rental market, impacts to home values, making it maybe more challenging for first-time buyers, and a challenge that STRs generally benefit visitors more than they do residents. In terms of priorities, people felt strongly about the principal residence requirement or the requirement for somebody on a single detached property to be a permanent resident when there's an STR on that property. People felt strongly about maintaining a safe and quiet neighborhood feel in residential neighborhoods. And there were some concerns from conversations we had at the open house about those sort of impacts. And there were also people that attended the open house that were very concerned about impacts to a changing framework and how that might impact past decisions they've made in terms of incorporating a short-term rental into their property. And we will discuss some of the mitigating options for that in the short-term rental presentation later on. There were some suggestions such as capping the number of short-term rental licenses in the district to maintain that market, but not to significantly increase it. There were concerns about ensuring that street parking doesn't get overrun in a situation where more short-term rentals were going to be permitted. And there were definitely opposing views about grandparenting existing uses. People talked a lot about the bed and breakfast use and how it's being used to permit 3 short-term rental suites within some houses. Some feel that that should continue to be permitted where it already has been to avoid significant financial impacts to people. Others felt that it wasn't the way things should be, and it shouldn't be continued to be permitted on existing properties. We did consider some of the different demographic groups within the survey and analyze their responses separately. So one of those cross tabulations was people who currently operate a short-term rental versus those that don't currently operate a short-term rental. And we wanted to understand those differences in perceptions. So for short-term rental operators, fewer of them are concerned about the impacts to neighborhood safety versus those that aren't. Same thing with impacts to home values. Operators generally think that fewer operators think that there are impacts to home values compared to those that don't operate a short-term rental. And same thing with rental supply. Those that don't operate short-term rentals are much more concerned about impacts to the long-term rental housing market. Another cross-tabulation we considered was homeowners versus renters. In terms of impacts to the rental supply, there wasn't much of a difference. Both groups are concerned about those impacts. In terms of neighborhood safety, again, not much of a difference. And in terms of home values, more renters are concerned about the impacts of short-term rentals to home values, understandably. Not being in the market, they might be more sensitive to those changes. Something that we've heard about in past council meetings has been employee housing and challenges within the community for seasonal employees, as well as any type of employee to find housing that the businesses rely on. We did ask that question in the survey, and we're a little bit surprised by the result. We thought there would be a little bit higher concerns among business owners. So the most common response to that question among business owners specifically was that they don't have much concern or much struggle. Their employees don't struggle that much to find housing, whereas about 1 in 3 say, yes, there are significant challenges with their employees finding housing. And that just may be due to the different nature of different businesses. Some may have higher paid employees, some may rely on lower paid employees. And then the remaining responses, about 30% responded either somewhat or they weren't quite sure.
Can I interrupt for 1 second with a question about that last slide? It wasn't clear to me reading this. Was there any follow-up question to determine if employers provided staff housing?
There wasn't a question on that specifically, no.
Okay.
So that
yeah, it's not a criticism, but when I saw that, I was similarly surprised, and then I thought, well, if I was a business owner that had staff housing, I'd probably say, well, I don't think my employees struggle too much because I provide housing for them. Okay, thank you.
So so you're right. So that could be contributing to that not much response for sure. There could also, yeah. So we asked some questions about gentle density built form, and we will go into a little bit more details on these within the gentle density report presentation. About 40% of respondents in the survey noted that they were comfortable with gentle density, but there was a similar amount of respondents that noted that it kind of depends on how it's implemented. And then there are some that are uncomfortable, about 16%, and about 1 in 10 are neutral on gentle density. The most common response in terms of the forms of gentle density that are supported in both the survey and the open house was duplexes. So it kind of goes from the lower density options with the highest support up to the lower amounts of support for the higher density options. But I'm going to, for expedience sake, skip over this because we're going to touch on it later. Some of the common concerns about gentle density are top three are infrastructure, parking, and tree loss and the environment. There are strategies that could be implemented as well to address these concerns that we will go over as well later on. Some of the other common ones were impacts to neighborhood character, traffic, building height / scale, very similar concerns to those we would see in other communities. We provided a few boards at the open house just to introduce a multifamily pre-zoning component of the zoning bylaw update. And there was a general support for the consideration of pre-zoning for multi-unit housing. Some of the common concerns, again, were related to infrastructure capacity. And in terms of where people wanted to see this types of pre-zoning, there was a strong support for places with good access to services and amenities. We also asked about whether this was generally supported more within the core area of Ucluelet versus on the outskirts where some of the current proposals are happening. And there was preference for a mixed approach where there's a little bit of both. Some of the other topics on the zoning bylaw that we had presented to council on a few months back were cannabis retail. There surprisingly wasn't a lot of interest in this topic either. There wasn't really strong opinions one way or the other, but there were some mitigating ideas that were brought up, such as a cap on the number of stores permitted within the district and some requirements around minimum distance from community facilities such as schools, parks, and other community spaces. Urban agriculture, these responses are ordered from the highest amount of support to the lowest amount of support. Greenhouses were a high interest topic, and we had a lot of good conversations around those at the open house. Similar with community gardens. And then kind of going down, farm stands and beekeeping had slightly lower interest, as well as poultry and small livestock. There was a lot of concern with anything related to poultry and small livestock, as it would have a relationship with wildlife and concerns around those safety aspects within the community. In terms of electric vehicle parking, there was high support for these facilities to potentially either have incentives or regulations for them to be available at hotels and resorts. And I believe that some of them may already have these. And there was support for new apartments to have on-site charging for tenants or owners. In terms of bike parking, there was support for more covered bike racks, particularly in institutional spaces such as parks and community centers, and within core commercial areas to make it easier for people to get to those on a bike. There wasn't so much support for requiring extensive end of trip facilities such as change rooms and showers within new commercial and industrial buildings. And a few comments around the district potentially supporting mountain bike trail development as part of economic development strategies, similar to places like how the village of Cumberland has done that. I know that wasn't really on topic for the zoning bylaw update, but it was brought up and a bit of an interesting comment. Nancy kind of touched on the key things we heard at the development community meeting, but we heard about some challenges with interpretation of the zoning bylaw and a desire to see interpretation become easier with the new bylaw. Some of the impacts can trickle down to the financial feasibility ultimately of new developments when projects are delayed. There were opportunities noted to have better alignment with updated versions of the BC Building Code, which I think Council has chatted about in the past and had a few reports on. There were notes about clarifying some of the commercial service zones specifically and how short-term rental and residential and mixed-use developments can take place in those zones, and a desire to potentially reduce some redundancies between the zoning bylaw and OCP development permit areas. Some of the other ideas brought up on kind of all things zoning bylaw included reserving some areas for residential only development in new subdivisions, and then allowing others to have short-term rental to provide different neighborhood options for people. Allowing short-term rental to be integrated with residential in some areas of the community, but not all. Considerations for incentives or requirements for employee housing. And then scaling the number or size of short-term rental units based on how large a lot is. So some of the next steps with these engagement findings are to use them to inform drafting of the zoning bylaw, and they already have informed some of the options that are being presented to council later on gentle density and short-term rental. Any future zoning bylaw drafting work will be done with staff and have a lot of collaboration. Once there are some draft bylaw materials ready, we will come back to council to present those and check in before allowing the community to comment on those drafts, and that will happen all before the draft bylaws are brought to council for consideration of bylaw readings. So with that, we'll open it up to questions, and either Nancy or I can respond.
Thank you, Aaron and Nancy. Questions from council? I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, Councillor Anderson might have one.
Random question just popped into my head. I think the turnout for this sounds great. I think that sounds. I'm really impressed. This is an off the cuff question here. In your experience, when you see a turnout like this, or a turnout at all, is there any demographic, or is there anything that you see that sticks out to you? Like, do you think that it's I guess my question at the end of the day, do you think that it's an effective sampling poll, what you see at the open house? Does it seem like an even mix to you, or like, I'm just trying to get a feel for what your thoughts were, because you've done this before. Do you think like the turnout that you saw and the experience you had was a pretty fair sampling of the community, in your opinion?
I can jump in on that, Aaron, and feel free to add.
I know that's a tough question. Sorry.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Anderson. Yes, I mean, in terms of what we've seen, we've definitely been in engagements where it seems like it's a very narrow demographic participating. I can say that was the feeling. It felt like a good cross-section from all different ages. A lot of people really interested in getting into the home ownership, but there is also people that are a little older on the demographic spectrum there as well. Lots of young families. There's quite a good cross section, I felt. There was also a situation in terms of like Airbnb picked up on the survey and the open house and sent emails to all listed STR operators as well. So we had a really good showing from current operators. So I think we took that into consideration, and that's why we kind of did that cross tabulation to show council the differences in results. But in terms of the cross section of the community, it seemed quite balanced. And I know we had some demographic information breakdown in the What We Learned report as well, but it certainly wasn't like some other ones that were very narrow that we've seen before.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer.
Any other questions, comments from council? Seeing none, there is one recommendation, if anybody would like to move that.
I could do that. I got it going.
Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
I'll move the council receive the report titled Zoning Bylaw Refresh, What We Learned, dated March 31st, 2026, for information.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing
I thought it was very interesting.
it, yeah, it was a great summary. Thank you for that, all the work to put into that. So seeing no further questions, all in favor? None opposed, that carries. Thank you. The next report is titled Zoning Bylaw Refresh, Gentle Density Housing Options, and it will also be presented by Tyler Brown, Director of Planning and Strategic Initiatives.
Thank you, Mayor. I will leave the presenting to Mr. Penner and Mrs. Henderson, but I will just introduce the next two reports. We're getting a little bit into more of the meat of the particular topic matters, and we are seeking council guidance. That's not to say that any of the recommendations that council makes tonight are in stone or are final. They are really just intended to guide us as we spend our energy and our efforts in the next phase of the process, preparing the draft bylaw and the draft zones. They are intended to be informed by what we heard through the community feedback, where we understand council conversation and discussion to be to date around housing matters and some of the other initiatives going on in the community. But also planning practices from elsewhere, not to take a cookie cutter approach, but to know that there is approaches that do work in similar sized communities or could work here if that is council and the community's prerogative. So the analysis here is based on those factors. We are asking for council guidance and how do we spend our efforts moving forward, and we'll take that guidance to craft zones and craft the zoning bylaw. But then we'll again test that against the community, and it will come back to council for their consideration in any future direction. That may be changes, that may be endorsement, but that path is. We need to be flexible and adaptable because there is still, we're getting to the important stage of it, and where we do start drafting, but we do fully intend to be adaptable depending on what we hear back through any further engagement. This is a little more pragmatic in the sense that we are entering the drafting stage, so it is a little bit of a turn in the project, and you know, we're moving from just listening now to putting ideas forward out there into the community, and any guidance from tonight's meetings informs that. So we're happy to answer any questions throughout because we do understand these are pretty big topics and there's a lot there. But there is a presentation as well that Nancy and Aaron will provide on both topics. So the first one is gentle density housing options, and I'll turn that over to Urban Systems now.
Just a quick question before that happens. The public consultation that's referred to in these recommendations, that would be public hearings?
That would be the most formal aspect of it, and of course will happen if we get to the point of introducing a new zoning bylaw. But we, within the engagement plan, we would be doing engagement that's not just that formal public hearing process.
So more open houses and surveys?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Mr. Brown, and I can take it from here if we don't have any additional questions. Okay, perfect. So moving ahead, yes, to reiterate where we're at is, we're really taking council's direction tonight, and then from here drafting some zoning regulations that will come back to council for future consideration. Although, it does take quite a bit of time and effort. So if there's any of these options that you're seeing sort of as a majority of council don't want to entertain, it's excellent to be receiving that type of feedback at this stage, so then we can put more energy into other parts of the bylaw. Tonight, we're going to be presenting about gentle density, and I think most of you are fairly aware of what that means. You've already done some work with the suite and ADU provision in the R1 zone, but through the SHMU legislation, lovingly called SHMU, but the small scale multi-unit housing that was introduced by the province for communities over 5,000. This has been a lot of work that we've been moving forward with other clients over the last couple of years, and it wasn't voluntary. So it was quite a different experience. I've been involved in gentle density in this sort of form for over 10 years. With the city of Kelowna implemented this back in about 2017, and have seen a lot of different situations. From, in that case, it was in an older neighborhood with a lot of buildings towards the end of their natural life and in a significant upswing in the marketplace. And the uptake of this new zoning provision was strong and fast, and they saw a lot of change. And in that case, it was very welcome. Since that time, the market has considerably flattened or in a downturn. Construction costs have gone crazy, really, since COVID, with the 150% increase in construction costs just since the start of COVID, has really changed the financial viability of these projects. So what you're hearing now in the conversation is that, you know, change is going to be very incremental. We're seeing very few of these like SHMU-like projects moving forward with our other clients. So I think it's really good just to keep that in the back of your mind. And then and how it applies to Ucluelet in general. You know, you have to have buildings that are really in existing neighborhoods that are near the end of their life, or there's a lot of undevelopable area on the lot. So based on what I see in Ucluelet, you know, change will likely be fairly incremental. So I think that's something to think about as you're making decisions tonight. And on the agenda, we'll go through the study area. We'll talk about like some of the opportunities and challenges to think about. We'll review the existing provisions in the R1 zone and then present a number of options, which you'll see recommendations and alternatives in your report. And of course, you can stray from those as much as you wish, but just try to give council you know, some options to hopefully make it easier for you to make some of these meaty decisions. So what we have put forward is really focusing in the intention on the R1 zone as an area of the community to potentially consider these gentle density options. It's got a lot of the more traditional housing stock, some of the older housing stock in the community, a fairly standard zoning regulatory provisions versus many of the other areas of the community are governed by fairly complex CD zones with quite a few layers to them. What we'd suggest is focusing on the R1 zone and then potentially expanding some of these gentle density concepts to other areas in the community, whether they be existing CD zones or new development areas. In terms of the study area, just like to kind of get your head around some of the development constraints, we've taken the development permit area mapping and just sort of overlaid it on top of the areas. So you can see, you know, protection from like natural hazard areas are in the gray, for example. You'll see that there's some of that area overlapping on these R1 lots, but many of the R1 is outside of this area, which also reflects the already developed nature of these properties. We've also got a map illustrating the tsunami risk for these properties, sort of just showing, you know, what that risk looks like in relation to the R1 zone. Before we get into the options, just wanted to provide an overview of the existing context with the current R1 provisions. So right now, there's a maximum lot coverage of 35%. So it's, you know, no matter what happens, if you stuck with that 35% provision, you still will have like 65% of the lot that's undeveloped. There's a maximum height of 11 meters, which would be enough to accommodate a 3-story building in the existing zone. The minimum lot size is 650 square meters, and we're seeing a lot of lots in the community that are of that size. There's many other larger R1 lots. Some of those are long, skinny lots that, you know, likely have steep slopes or environmentally sensitive areas on them as well. But there's a lot of lots that are in that larger than this as well in the community. So right now, a single detached dwelling, a secondary suite, and a detached accessory dwelling unit, or which I'll refer to as an ADU, are permitted in the existing zone. So for three units, 1 principal and 2 accessory are permitted. So when we did the survey and asked the questions around gentle density, considering the provision of allowing duplexes came out with the highest supporting ranking in both the survey and the open house. With the new or relatively new BC building code provisions, duplexes are now also permitted to have secondary suites as long as they're vertically separated or side by they're side by side duplexes, not up and down duplexes. They could each have a suite under them as well. So you could potentially have a duplex with suite and achieve 4 units per lot. So that's something to consider. Having this suite option within the duplex also provides a nice mortgage helper option for someone purchasing that property. And then, of course, the income from that secondary suite in a long-term rental form can be applied that the bank would consider when they're applying for a mortgage. Another item that came up, and I think there's a couple different ways that, council could consider these, but the small lot, people, ideally, I think everybody would love to live in a single detached home, and moving away from that in our minds is challenging. So there's certainly people that were really interested in ways to achieve less expensive single detached dwellings. So could we have like smaller lots and still have like our own space and not share walls? That was quite well received in the survey. There was less interest in it in the open house. So the concept would be having, essentially permitting smaller lots to have these 2 houses, which would normally be fitting on a 1 lot. And then they must permit the secondary suites, whereas a fee simple subdivision or bare land based on SHMU legislation. And then, so yeah, this is just basically like looking at the idea of splitting an existing lot in 2 to create these two single detached options. Council and another version is when you're looking at developments, you could be looking at more smaller lot strata developments as a form of housing, but that would be sort of outside this gentle density scope that we're looking at. Another thing that's coming up in communities that we're seeing with the larger R1 type lots that has an existing house on it that's not at its end of its life, but has, a good large size flat lot, is rather than putting in a carriage house, they might have a family situation or employee situation where they'd want to put in a larger single detached house that would be larger than an ADU. And that they could fit it sort of in the backyard, if you will. So it doesn't necessarily work well from a subdivision perspective, but the idea of having 2 single detaches on 1 lot is another option. And you're starting to see more of this type of living arrangement and generational living just because of the costs of properties nowadays. So it's just another option to consider, 2 detached dwellings and, on a lot, just to create more flexibility. So just an example of that, maybe just go to the slide before, is just with the example 1, we've shown you can have a 650 square meter lot with a house in an ADU. And if you had a 1,300 square meter lot, instead of subdividing it because it's difficult, because the way the house is situated is just allowing those 2 lots on the same area, or 2 houses on the same area, but on 1 lot. And another option is the triplex, allowing, a 3-unit dwelling. There is moderate support for this in the survey and the open house, both at like 28-27%. And then this is really about allowing smaller units in 1 dwelling, fitting on the lot, providing lower cost options to get into the market in that sort of low density neighborhood rather than a larger multifamily complex. So there's, I think, quite a lot of people wanting to buy their first home that the triplex or 4-plex types options is of interest to them. And so here's another example of the triplex or, row house type development or townhouse type development on a larger lot, which still is providing, a fair bit of open space on the property. So it's got a lower lot coverage. It's great for the young families that want more yard for their family and their kids to sort of play in, yet be able to, afford housing. So yeah, generally like smaller primary unit options. So providing lower cost alternatives for the community. with still like pretty decent unit sizes of 170 square meters or 1,830 square feet. So definitely this would be an example of like family-sized townhouses. The fourplex had sort of what we'd call a moderate or low interest or support from the community. The survey was not that different than the triplex at 24%, and the open house was 8%. We do have the example in the photo is from Ucluelet, so it does exist in the community, but really having 4 smaller units within one building. In a way, you could say it's kind of like a duplex with suites, but the difference here is that you'd have 4 principal residences on one property, sharing in the, like generally you'd see these as purpose-built rentals or a strata complex. And just look from another perspective, this is just an example of a building, kind of the first 3 are like the same building, divided up differently. So one looks like kind of the old BC box, if you will, a standard house on a lot. The second is a duplex retrofit, or what that same dwelling would look like with 2 units. The third on the left has a secondary suite included as well. And then the fourth example is someone could essentially tear down that building and rebuild, probably a larger house on the lot. But basically what that would look like if they were to build to the maximum building envelope. So I think that's some of the things that people are doing now is like, basically regulate the form through the zoning regulations and allow people to divide that house up into, or that building up into multiple units. Kind of what's the difference? I think, some people would say, of course, the other things that come along with housing are things like parking and traffic, that when you have more units, there's generally larger parking requirements and sometimes more traffic associated with them kind of come up quite frequently. And there, of course, are some infrastructure considerations as well. But that's sort of one of the thinking points is you're basically could allow someone in a single detached dwelling build this. Why not allow people to divide it up into multiple units? And here's another example, just the top 3 with sort of similar building envelopes split up differently on a similar parcel, with the duplex unit with the secondary suite in the first one, with the triplex in the middle one, and the fourplex in the last one on the top row. And then we have slightly larger lots below with townhouses on the left, and then the small lot single detached subdivision with the smaller lot size. So the one on the right at the bottom only has a 9 meter by 33 meter lot, which is significantly smaller than the one on the left. But just another way to just kind of look at how we could provide housing a little bit differently through gentle density. And the report goes through these in detail. It has a number of recommendations associated with each one for council's consideration, and really getting any direction from council at this time will really help us pull together the bylaw as we move forward and making sure that we're spending time in the right places. So on the next slide, we have the summary of the options that are outlined in the report that we're looking for council's direction on as we turn this over to you. And before I do that, I'll just quickly go through the next steps. And the mayor was asking questions as well regarding, what engagement looks like as we go forward. So we'll get the direction that council's prepared to provide us tonight. And then from here, we're going to start working on drafting proposed bylaw regulations. Based on your direction, we'll bring that back to council for further input and consideration as well. After we kind of workshop it with staff, we'll check in with council. Then what we'd like to do is we have a public review period where we want to make where we're going available for the public to take a look at, through web information, and the ability to review the proposed regulations. We do have another engagement sort of in like a community presentation that we have planned. If council feels that there's more engagement than what we're talking about or what we've put in the work plan, then we can, revisit that and maybe how that could impact the budget potentially. But we definitely have, let's get this and share it with the public. Let's work with staff to make sure that it's broadcast and that there's opportunities to provide comments. And then we do have a virtual meeting with the community that we would present the regulations and take questions. And then after all of that, we would bring it back to council again for consideration of the bylaw readings, which will also trigger the formal public hearing. But ideally, we want the community to feel well engaged before we get to that formal process. And with that concludes the presentation, and be happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. Questions from council? Comments? I can't see Councillor Noel anymore. Oh, his camera's off. Well, it certainly sounds like there's going to be plenty of public engagement, so I'm happy to hear that. And yeah, so I don't see any questions. We have 4 recommendations. If anybody would like to start with those,
Be happy to.
Councillor Mafty.
I'll move that council directs staff to include duplex with secondary suite provisions in draft gentle density zones for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration. I'll further move that council directs staff to include small lot single detached dwelling provisions in draft gentle density zones for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration. I'll further move that council directs staff to include provision for 2 single detached dwellings on large lots to be further defined in draft gentle density zones for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration. And I'll finally move that council directs staff to include triplex provisions in draft gentle density zones for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I'll second.
Mr. Chow,
Just advise maybe move one motion at a time.
I wondered about that. It didn't say anything in my notes here, so.
You tell me now. All right, we'll take it back to the top. I'll move that council direct staff to include duplex with secondary suite provisions in draft gentle density zones for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I will second that.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion?
So that would be like, we did the rezoning for Signy's house on Holly Crescent, and it's a duplex and was allowed the secondary suites, as I recall. And I walk by that one every day, and I'm all about that sort of build. It works.
Sort of infilling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries.
I'll move that council direct staff to include small lot single detached dwelling provisions in draft gentle density zones for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion?
Would this include like lots small and like for tiny homes, or would this be a different sort of thing?
Mr. Brown?
No, the intention here is this, you could build a very small home, but if you're talking about sort of the tiny homes built on a trailer platform or similar, no, that's not the intention of these regulations.
Thanks.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, that carries.
I'll move that council direct staff to include provision for 2 single detached dwellings on large lots to be further defined in draft gentle density zones for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, that carries.
I'll finally move that council direct staff to include triplex provisions in draft gentle density zones for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion?
So could this be, I see it in the city more than I see it here, but triplexes that are sort of stacked, one on each. Your diagram was, you know, side by each on a property, but could it also be up down as well?
Mr. Brown?
In theory, yes. I think you would run into potential limitations with respect to the maximum permitted height and items like that. So I think there would be details there that would flush out through the programmatic requirements of any particular zone that would likely dictate the ability to stack or not stack. But
Yeah. I thought that might be the case, but those are the ones I'm familiar with from the city, and that's in the older homes that are already built and overbuilt. So
they go up instead
So
of
they-
sideways.
yes.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed. That carries as well.
Did you see Mako?
Mako's got his camera off, I think.
Thought you were saying triple X when it said triplex when you first said that. What's going on?
Vin Diesel. Remember that? That was
Yeah.
great.
I'm going to call a 5-minute recess, if that's okay.
Was this because of Vin Diesel?
No, because I've been drinking a lot of water. 5:36. We'll call a short 5-minute recess. The next report is titled Zoning Bylaw Refresh Short-Term Rental Analysis, and it will also be presented by Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn this right over to Urban Systems here. And, we know this is a hot topic in the community and rightfully so. We understand there's a tension there. So as we try to guide this, just like the last report, any guidance is very much appreciated. And as you saw from the results of the engagement, it kind of just proved out what everybody intuitively knows, that there's a divided opinions on the impact of short-term rentals in the community. Ultimately, through the zoning bylaw refresh, we both the housing options and the short-term, we do know that in order to address some of that tension, we do need to bring on housing supply with respect to rental and more housing supply. But that's not to say there isn't tweaks that can be made to the short-term rental regulations as well. I would just add that there was a motion provided by council with respect to changes that were made fairly recently with respect to the zoning bylaw and the ability of, once a unit had been used as a secondary suite, it could not go back to a short-term rental. The report before you is not seeking direction on that particular question. We will have options that, as we draft these zones, that council can consider to address that or not, based on council's direction. So we will be bringing that forward at a future date. This is more to get direction on some potential options for short-term rentals that might make it into the bylaw, and then we would address at a future date some of those regulations that were around. Once a unit has been used for a certain type of tenancy, can it be used again for something else? That now we're talking a little bit more about the form before we get into those more tenancy conversations.
Okay, thanks for that, because that was my notice of motion a while back, and I just wondered what had happened to that.
Yes, it's top of mind, and we'll bring it forward when it makes sense through this process. And I do think this process is a very good way that we can address that notice of motion, informed by council direction, but also that community input, and hopefully we'll have those all come together where council can feel confident in making a decision on that particular question.
Okay, thanks for addressing that.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Nancy and Aaron here for this last one.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. So I'm going to talk about short-term rentals today, go a little bit into the existing framework, some of the background information that's available from academic research, the provincial legislation, recognizing that not all aspects of it apply in Ucluelet, but it can be kind of a way to benchmark against what's happening in the rest of the province. And then we will get into some of the options provided. And as Tyler noted, we've tried our best to summarize the engagement findings and come up with options that bring together the engagement findings with professional opinions as well as background research. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't propose some different options or give us direction to try out some different sort of scenarios. And we will talk about the existing bed and breakfast use and consider some options for maybe how that might be crafted to fit the intended use. Some of the common acronyms that will come up throughout the presentation are STR for short-term rental, LTR for long-term rental, and B&B for bed and breakfast.
Aaron, don't forget to share your screen with the presentation.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Nancy. So I had the agenda up here, but I'm going to move past it at this point. So the existing framework, and similar to the gentle density, when we're talking about short-term rentals today, we're mostly talking about it in the existing residential neighborhoods. So within those R zones, the residential zones, the current framework permits a bed and breakfast use within a single detached house, comprising approximately 35% of the gross floor area of the home. That use cannot be located within the principal dwelling component of the single family dwelling, nor the secondary suite or an accessory dwelling unit if the parcel has those. As Tyler had mentioned, currently there's no short-term rentals permitted in an area that is currently or was formerly used as a secondary suite. And the bed and breakfast rooms are not permitted to have a full kitchen or the power supply that would be necessary to support a full kitchen. There are a number of other zones that permit different forms of short-term rental, one being the guest house form. So that's very similar to a bed and breakfast, but there are fewer limitations and it can comprise a much larger area of the home. But it still does require a principal resident to be living within that guest house. And these are permitted specifically within the GH guest house zone, and we're not proposing any changes to that zone at this time. And it's also permitted in some CD zones. Within the guest house zone, there's also provisions for guest cottages, which are essentially a detached accessory dwelling unit that's used as a short-term rental unit. Similar to other zones, there is a requirement for a permanent resident to be living within the single detached house on the property or within a guest house if it is a guest house. And the number of cottages is scaled to the lot size. So it's that one. There are some vacation rental zones, VR specific zones that are kind of mixed into existing residential areas. And these are kind of what a lot of people think about when they think about a short-term rental, in that this use is using what would have otherwise been a residential dwelling unit for commercial tourist accommodation. So there's a vacation rental 1 zone and a vacation rental 2 zone. There is a type called a tourist accommodation suite, but this is only permitted in one specific zone. That's the CD1 zone, Eco-Industrial Park. And this is similar to a provision to have 1 bed and breakfast room within a single family dwelling. But in order to have that, a single detached dwelling and secondary suite both have to already be on the parcel and both have to be occupied by principal residents. And finally, there is a resort condo use. And again, we're not considering changes to this use. This is permitted mostly within specific tourist commercial zones and other commercial zones. So we wanted to get a bit of an understanding about the existing bed and breakfast uses within the community, specifically within the R1 zone, which comprises the majority of existing residential neighborhoods. And we found that about 13% of R1 lots have a business license for B&B use, which is about what we would have expected to see. In terms of some of the background data and statistics that's supported by academic research on the topic of short-term rentals, as Nancy had mentioned, or Tyler had mentioned, it can be a hot topic within communities, and it also has been a hot topic within academia, just because of how the impacts can translate down to the long-term rental market as well as the ownership market, and kind of who are the winners and the losers with short-term rentals. So there has been a lot of evidence to support the conclusion that as short-term rentals do have impacts on the rental housing supply. They likely increase rents in many communities where they exist. And there is a few studies that are done specifically in BC and look at how the impacts are different between small communities and resort communities versus large urban centers. And those findings have found that those effects on the rental market have often been stronger in small communities and resort communities compared to larger urban centers. Studies have also found that a few commercial ventures often own a lot of short-term rental properties and can be the primary benefactors. So a study in BC found that 56% of short-term rental revenue in 2022 was earned by the top 10% of short-term rental hosts, and 25% of revenue was earned by the top 1%. So just another kind of interesting finding. In terms of the ownership market, there is less research available on that, so impacts to home values are a little bit more speculative. Nancy had mentioned it a bit earlier, but when somebody is trying to qualify for a mortgage, banks typically don't factor in what could be earned from a short-term rental within a suite in the house. In terms of how much somebody could afford to pay for a mortgage, they would typically only account for how much could be earned from a long-term rent. And I'm guessing that's because it's typically considered a more stable form of income. But that doesn't mean that people may not factor STR income into how much they're willing to pay for a property. There has been quite a bit of research on the principal residence requirement, especially within residential neighborhoods as opposed to like commercial short-term rental resort condo type uses. And it has been found to be quite effective in mitigating some of the impacts of short-term rentals to the housing market. They can make it more challenging for somebody to purchase a second property as an investment property and use the whole thing for short-term rentals. Obviously, there are some complexities within a resort municipality that may not exist in some other communities. So one aspect is that short-term rentals, due to their potential for revenue generation, they may have contributed to some developments happening versus not happening in terms of the value of the units being higher, as well as they can be an attractive mortgage helper, as we mentioned, for home ownership. This is a little bit anecdotal, but I think for a lot of people that have tried to come stay in Iqaluit during the high season, it is pretty challenging to find a unit and they are quite expensive. And this may mean that future restrictions on short-term rentals could potentially lead to some missed opportunities in terms of the tourist economy. A limitation of some of the academic research is that it is challenging to isolate the impact of STRs alone on housing values in the rental market. Those academic studies do attempt to do that, but it may not be a perfect method. And then another consideration is that significant changes to short-term rental regulations, they may not necessarily reduce housing prices at this point. Obviously, it's impossible to predict that, but it may be that housing is as expensive as it is now, and people generally do need a mortgage helper, and taking that option away may not bring it down to a point where the average person could afford a home. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but the views are a little bit mixed on whether Iqaluit currently has too many or not enough short-term rentals or about the right amount. However, what we did hear across the board, or was a strong finding from the survey, was that there is a lot of support for the principal resident requirement. We did have a few hypotheses going into the survey about short-term rentals. Some had surprising findings or findings that were different than we might have expected. Others were consistent with what we would have expected. So we went over a little bit about the differences between owner and renter perspectives earlier on. And in terms of how renters and owners relate with the challenges of short-term rentals, we thought that there was going to be a big difference between owners and renters, and found that that wasn't necessarily the case. Both had a high identification with the challenges of short-term rentals. We thought that fewer short-term rental operators would identify with challenges than those that don't operate in STRs short-term rentals, and that was the case, unsurprisingly. And we thought that much of the community would be concerned about the impacts of short-term rentals on neighborhood safety and cohesion. And although at the open house that was like quite a common aspect of discussion, the survey didn't have a strong sense that that was the case. And it may be that people that are more concerned about that are more interested in having discussions about that than writing out notes in a survey about that. So just again, as a bit of a benchmark against what's happening in the rest of the province, the principal residence requirement that I know doesn't apply to Iqaluit and you have not opted into does allow for somebody to have a short-term rental within their principal residence, as well as one secondary suite or detached accessory dwelling unit on the property. Similarly, this can also take place in multifamily housing throughout the province. So, for example, somebody owns a strata apartment and lives in it full time. They're going away to travel for work for a few months. They could use their units for short-term rental for part of the year, so long as the subject local government hasn't further restricted that option. As we touched on earlier, in Ucluelet, our residential zones, short-term rentals are currently only permitted as a bed and breakfast use, which is kind of a higher standard than we might see within the provincial principal residence requirement. But that's balanced out by the fact that somebody could have 3 bed and breakfast units versus the principal residence requirement. You could only really have 1 full-time short-term rental unit within a secondary suite or ADU. Quite a significant aspect of the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act is that it doesn't allow for the grandparenting that can happen with other zones. So often when the zoning bylaw is updated, there will be things that are permitted today and that are legally operating on a parcel. The zoning will be updated and the new zone won't permit that existing use, but the Local Government Act bakes in grandparenting so that that use continues to be legal, even though it's not permitted within the updated zone. Any of those zoning provisions that apply to short-term rental, there is a nullifying piece to the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act that doesn't allow that grandfathering to happen. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a way to still do it. It would just mean that another strategy needs to be applied, such as maintaining existing zoning on parcels that might have a legally operating bed and breakfast. It would just be a different zone than the updated zone that would apply to avoid kind of pulling the rug out from a homeowner who has invested significant funds to have that use. So getting into some of the options, again, we've tried to bring things together into some good options, but it doesn't mean that council can't tell us something else that we've missed or put forward a different framework. So the first option for single detached lots would be to permit 1 short-term rental unit within a secondary suite or an detached accessory dwelling unit. Some of the benefits of this option are that there would be flexibility for properties that may not necessarily be able to have a secondary suite. They could still have that short-term rental in a detached accessory unit. We heard a lot from people at the open house that they would like to be able to have a kitchen in their short-term rental unit because that would provide them the option to kind of have maybe older parents living in the unit for part of the year that can use the kitchen when they're visiting, as well as still have it operating as a short-term rental for other parts of the year, that kind of scenario. It would allow for seasonal, and that's kind of the seasonal use scenario. Something to consider is that secondary suites and ADUs both have specific building code regulations for fire separation and noise separation that are pretty critical to life safety. So when you're permitting a short-term rental in one of these types of units, those kind of safety benchmarks would apply compared to like a bed and breakfast room that isn't considered necessarily a secondary suite within the building code. Compared to permitting more than 1 short-term rental unit, in this scenario, the parcel would still be primarily residential. Some of the challenges, and this doesn't necessarily apply if the existing requirement that Tyler had mentioned at the beginning for a secondary suite that's currently a secondary suite not to be able to be transitioned. If that was to be taken away, there would be a risk that there may be conversion back from a long-term rental unit to a short-term rental unit, but that's a future conversation. And then new short-term rentals or new secondary suites that get built are going to be less likely to be long-term rentals than they would otherwise be. An alternative option to consider would be to permit one short-term rental unit in any of the units on a single detached lot with a secondary suite and ADU. This would provide the option for somebody, essentially provide more options for people in how they use their property. It may allow for more affordable path to home ownership. For example, if somebody wanted to purchase a property and live in the secondary suite and use kind of the upper stories as a short-term rental, that could potentially generate a bit more revenue. They could flip that around maybe when they're older and have a family or have a second income in the household. And it also could provide an option for people on a fixed income like seniors to live in the cheaper unit, which would be the secondary suite, and generate a bit more revenue from the upper stories. Some of the challenges is that this can be interpreted as the short-term rental use being the more dominant use on the parcel. It could still lead to existing long-term rentals being converted without that that provision that currently exists, and same challenges as essentially option 1. Just a quick note related to this option is similar to the provincial principal residence requirement. We could also explore the option for somebody to have their primary dwelling or principal residence be a short-term rental for a set maximum number of the year, just to provide a little bit more flexibility for people that might live somewhere else for part of the year or travel quite a bit for work, to still be able to do that at some points. With multiple detached dwellings, it kind of depends on what council decides on for the first two options. But essentially, the recommended option would be to carry forward the concept of permitting one short-term rental per property. So if there was 2 single detached dwellings on a larger lot and it was still one property, then one of those houses that has a secondary suite could have a short-term rental. And if there was a subdivision situation like the small lot scenarios that Nancy had shown earlier, then those are 2 separate properties and they could each have a short-term rental within a secondary suite. With the duplexes, again, if they're considered to be with secondary suites, which we received that direction, then the recommended option would be to consider permitting short-term rentals within those secondary suites, similar to the scenario, as a similar option for a duplex homeowner to have the same sort of flexibility and mortgage helper options as a single detached property. But that said, there is a higher potential for nuisance complaints due to these units already having shared walls. There may be some people that feel uncomfortable with neighbors coming, or with guests coming in and out of a backyard, for example, that's functioning as a shared backyard if they have children there. So this one is a little bit more complicated than the previous options, I would say, and council's direction would be appreciated. Some of the alternative options that are in the report would be to permit a short-term rental in one of the secondary suites. This option would be consistent with kind of the one short-term rental per lot concept, but it would be challenging to implement. And another option, as I kind of alluded to, is to maybe draw the line at multifamily housing if you feel that that's an acceptable solution. And those secondary suites within duplex units could be contributing to the long-term housing stock. It may not provide that same mortgage helper option for duplexes, but there are kind of multiple ways to spin that one. Within triplexes, the recommended option is not to permit short-term rental units at all. So with a triplex, just to refresh on that, this would be 3 primary dwelling units, all with shared walls or shared floor and ceiling if the stacked option is considered. So this has much closer living quarters. There is kind of maybe a sense that people are uncomfortable with having multiple shared walls and having a short-term rental in one of those units. And as Nancy had mentioned, Strata triplexes are going to be a likely scenario, and it gets tricky to determine which of those strata units would be permitted to have the short-term rental in it as well. The only kind of some of the good points about permitting a short-term rental in a triplex could be that it allows a mortgage helper if somebody owns an entire triplex as a rental triplex. But again, it's outweighed, we would say, in our analysis by what we've heard in the engagement, and as well as this intended triplex is intending to be another option for people to get into the housing market. So we've gone over at a high level the existing bed and breakfast use. So our understanding of the existing bed and breakfast use is that it is leading to scenarios where people have up to 3 short-term rental units within a single family dwelling on a residential property, which may not be how it was intended to function. So there are ways that we've seen in other communities to like tighten that use up a little bit, just so that parcels are functioning more in the traditional bed and breakfast sense. So one option within the report is to explore that concept of tightening it up a little bit. And kind of a challenge still of that option is that even with a traditional bed and breakfast, that property is still functioning primarily as a commercial property rather than a residential property, which may not align with some perspectives of how neighborhoods should be. So there is an alternative option of just not permitting bed and breakfast in our zones. We will preface this by saying the intention is not to create illegal uses where there already is a bed and breakfast on a residential zone. Again, our understanding is that an objective of this process is not to pull the rug out from anybody. So we would figure out a strategy for those existing properties with a bed and breakfast to continue to be permitted as they are today. I think we've gone over the next steps in the past few, but summarize them quickly again. We're going to work with staff to draft zones and the draft zoning bylaw. We will check in with council and the public before presenting anything to council for consideration of bylaw readings and the public hearing. So with that, we can open up for questions if there are any.
Thank you. Questions from council? I have one question about recommendation 5. It's talking about bed and breakfasts that would require this use to function in the traditional intended manner where rooms do not have exterior doors and hosts serve breakfast to guests in a common kitchen. I thought we did away with all that. We did. That was part of 1310.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why are we putting it back in again is my question.
I think I can't, you can jump in there, and I'm just going to say, previously we had like a municipal policy that was essentially, I mean, I don't think anyone really, I think the part why am I having so much trouble saying this? So Aaron was coming up with an idea what other municipalities are using to I guess sort of tone down the number of, or the high number of STRs in these residential homes. And I guess that was the intention of our 1310 bylaw that we repealed. But I think it was done more in the vein that we just thought it was generally ridiculous, because it was basically just a disincentive for people to be an STR. No one wanted to do it. No one wanted. They called it the muffin clause because, you had to come in their front door, you had to serve them muffins and things like that. Yeah, I think. Am I correct on that background?
Yeah, that for sure.
So
and it had something also to do with the province saying there would be no more grandfathering as well.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the major reason I think we repealed it, so that those 38 families could actually stay in town and not move away.
Yeah. At least 38. Yep. That's true.
Yeah. So just curious why we're thinking about bringing that back.
Yeah, so it was considered through the mayor to council and directly to the mayor. It was considered as an option just from what we'd heard from the community about challenges around having 3 short-term rental units in a single family dwelling. Yeah, apologies for not capturing that background, and that's good input for us to have. And I think the intention all along has been for any properties that currently do have a bed and breakfast within an R zone to continue to permit that through a specific zone that would apply to those properties. Because we definitely don't want to create any sort of illegal uses happening. It was just kind of intended to be for any properties in the future within a newer or updated framework.
Yeah, I don't think we wanted that.
Okay, fair enough. That's useful input. Thank you.
And then in option 6, you talk about grandfathering in, and so is the province now changed their mind on that? So properties can be grandfathered in? Because they were really specific at the time, 3 years ago, that they're not just moving forward, but anybody that was grandfathered in was no longer grandfathered in. So has that changed?
No, that hasn't changed. So grandfathering is still not permitted. But I was trying in the presentation to clarify that grandfathering is a way that the Local Government Act has allowed for essentially a backdoor, or to make it easier when you're updating bylaws, that you're not creating illegal uses. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't still, for example, apply an R1 zone or a form of a residential zone that permits bed and breakfasts on properties that currently have a bed and breakfast. So we're essentially doing the work to make sure that grandfathering happens rather than it just automatically happening through that Local Government Act provision.
So you're spot zoning properties, basically.
Yes.
Right.
Or you could create exceptions within the zone for specific properties. It just has to be, directly spelled out. Yes.
Councillor Noel?
Thank you, Your Worship. And Aaron and Nancy, it's a very thorough report. Thank you for everything. I thought we'd get to the juicy one, which is short-term rentals. All 6 of these, I hope, Your Worship, you're going to allow us to dive into each one of them. We seem to be bouncing around right now, but it would be nice because I think all 6 of these have a bit of meat for all of us. The one thing that came up that resonates for me is, we talk about residential long-term uses, and I'm really pleased to see that 77% of the people that filled out the survey were in agreement that it needs to be the primary residence. As we push this forward out, for consultation here, once we get through these 6, I'd just like to see the wording change a little bit. I'm supportive of short-term rentals in residences. I always have been. My tune hasn't changed. I like the fact that you're thinking of changing it from 3 down to 2. But I get a little awkward when the primary residence, the person that's not signing the getting the homeowners grant, for me, if that's not you, I have challenges to support those people. Then it definitely turns into being able to live in the community, but then actually just trying to pay for your little business that you're happening in a residential zone. So I know we're going to dive into that. I'm supportive of it. And again, I just really want to give a big kudos to you and Nancy for putting this in. This is a very thorough report, and I'm glad that you had as much engagement as you did.
Thanks, Councillor Noel. I wasn't really jumping around. I just had those 2 questions about some of these recommendations, but yes, we will go through each one individually. Any other questions for urban systems? No, if seeing none, we can start going through them one at a time. If somebody wants to read the first one. Councillor Anderson.
I will move the council direct staff to draft residential zones that permit 1 short-term rental unit in a secondary suite or detached accessory dwelling unit on lots with 1 single detached dwelling for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Further discussion. Councillor Mafty?
I'm going to jump in and say that I think it's very useful, and I think it's necessary to move through these one by one. I am happy to get into the nitty gritty, but I when I read this and I was thinking about it, I kind of approached it holistically. And the one thing that I felt was the most relevant as I approached each one of these and as I approached them collectively was the little pie chart there in the report. And the one sort of inescapable conclusion is that there are only 10% of the people that think that we need more STRs, and collectively 66% of respondents say that there are either too many or there are enough. So the vast majority of the community is happy with the number of STRs or feels that there should be fewer. And of the people that want more STRs, it's 10%, which is a very small percentage. 24% unsure, but even if you assume that all of them would change their mind and say that we'd like more, that's still a significant minority. So to my mind, the argument in favor of ensuring that we have the option of granting STR as an allowable use should really only be considered to maintain the status quo in terms of a proportion. So of new builds, how many should have STRs in order to maintain that proportion that reflects the views of the people in the survey. So at that point, I say to myself, okay, well, of the different scenarios that you could incorporate an STR, some of them just don't seem appropriate to me. So, duplex, for example, triplex, for example. So at the same time that I'm sort of anti-STR in general, I also want to leave the door open for what would it look like to have more STRs? Where should they go? And so that was my thinking going in. So if I vote against some of these, it's not just like, no, 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 no. It's more, where would I like to see STRs? And based on my understanding of where the community might like to see STRs, considering that a very small proportion of the community thinks that there should be more to begin with.
Thanks for those points. Councillor Noel?
Yeah, this one I'm supportive of. I think it just gives the homeowner options, whether that's a long-term or a short-term in their residence, if it's their primary residence. Again, I would just like to see language more around primary residence. That's not in the recommendations here before us, but I like to get that out to for the public to make that comment, but they've already spoken about it. But anyways, I'm fully supportive of this one.
Thank you, Councillor Noel. And I think we're all very supportive of the owner living on the property and not being a property that has short-term rentals with no owner living there.
Right. But I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that. Yeah, I agree with them for sure. I think the sticking point I might have with Councillor Noel is just I think anywhere I've ever seen places that have STRs, it's to be able to have a primary resident that's either the actual owner or a family that's living there. I think in either case, even if somebody was to buy a place here and then they have a family or a principal resident live in that space, that's like less than 35%, or great 35% would be short-term rental, but the other side, the other 65% would be for a family, or so it would be, you're providing housing one way or the other. So it's really hard to delineate that. I think it would be hard to police that as well. But yeah, and I also, there's a part about, and I remember hearing this at UBCM one time, that the majority of STRs are owned by the percentage or whatever, there's commercial entities that buy up a whole bunch of Airbnbs and do that. I really don't think that's the case in our particular situation. And I think as a resort community, it allows people to participate in the tourist industry, and especially in lieu of some of the economic, resources that we had that fell off, I think is really important. So sometimes we'll have a lot of the people I know that have STRs, they're teachers, nurses, they're people that are, pillars of the community that we need to come here. They don't make a ton of money, but the only way that they're making it work is by having those STRs in the basement that can do that. So how I feel about, I think, that the horses are out of the barn at this point. If we start to pull back on these things, you're going to hurt people. If you say that the cost of a house is elevated because of STRs, if you were to try and remedy that and start telling people they can't do it, they have to sell their homes at a loss, it'd be devastating. I don't think you can backtrack on those types of situations. And that would just hurt some of the most important people in our community. What was the other thing that I was going to say? It is a tough one because I thought to myself when we had a really large affordable housing development that we're all unanimous about for a while, and I thought because short-term rentals are sort of out of there's a lot right now compared to the number of long-term rentals, that it would be great if we could get that housing needs, especially on the affordable side, ticked off, so then this wouldn't be such a egregious topic. But here we are, it's here, and we've the larger development that we're talking about is stalled right now, so we can't really promise that there's going to be a lot of things there. But yeah, it's a tough one. And then going back to the spot zoning part, that one is also like a difficult one for me to wrestle with. And the reason I would say that is, and realizing that unless we have a lot of affordable housing options, that this gets sticky. But I think if you have two homes side by side, and one person's allowed to do STR and the other one isn't, you're starting to kind of play with, like the value of homes in a town. And I think that can get, like, spot zoning can get a little scary to me. And not that legally non-conforming is a good thing for me either, because we saw what happened there. Hey, don't worry about it. You're going to be fine legally non-conforming, and the rug gets pulled out from under you. People are like, oh my, they're devastated. They don't know what to do. So I see that. I see the catch-22 that we're in here, but I think we have to be incredibly careful about how we play with property values by, spot zoning, like saying this house here, the exact same house next to it is allowed to do it and you're not. That might be a way forward. I think we have to think about that and really have that conversation and see what is the best for the overall community in this case.
Thanks for your comments. Councillor Noel?
Sorry to labor the point there, but I just really want to just remind us, all of us, and in particular Councillor Anderson, everything that's come before council, whether it's Josh, High Focus, whatever that's going to turn out, or across the street behind the ridge, all those new developments have zero nightly rental in there. Those are all this council, previous councils have made that clear. There's no nightly rental. So this one is particular to the old part of town. Anybody who's been living in a house that's been built from older parts of the community, Helen Street, Holly Crescent, all those kind of places, this is affected them. This is not affecting new developments. We've already said this. So again, I just really want to, just reemphasize the fact is this is very site specific to where we're allowing this, and to allowing those people that have owned these homes, a lot of them for a long time, and to be able to have an option. So anyways, we've labored it. I know we're going to pass this. I just really want to get, we have to really remember where this is going to have an impact, and it's going to be on those people that are living in homes that are getting older. We're all getting older. We're all going to want options. Kids are leaving the houses, and it's giving people the ability to age in place and have some reasonable opportunities. Okay, I'll end it at that.
Thanks, Councillor Noel. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor? None opposed. That carries. Thank you. Are you on a roll, Councillor Anderson?
I'll keep going. Yeah, sure. I will further move the council direct staff to draft residential zones that permit a short-term rental unit in each secondary suite on lots with 2 single detached dwellings, including small lot single detached subdivision, to a maximum of 1 short-term rental per single detached lot for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? No, seeing none, we'll go for the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries.
Right. I will further move that council direct staff to draft residential zones that do not permit any short-term rental units on triplex
One.
lots. Oh, did
Oh, I think you skipped one, maybe.
Did I? Did I skip? Oh, sorry. I'll go back. I'll further move the council direct staff to draft residential zones that permit one short-term rental unit and secondary suites of duplex units for a total of two short-term rental units per lot in secondary suites only for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries.
I will also move that council direct staff to draft residential zones that do not permit any short-term rental units on triplex lots for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
Second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Further discussion?
I gotta just chime in there. If you don't mind it, the other two there, I wasn't happy with the turnout, but it is what it is. We're on the third one here regarding duplexes again.
Fourth one.
The fourth one, triplex.
Triplex, disregard.
Okay, call for the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries.
Lastly, I will move the council direct staff to draft amendments to bed and breakfast use that do not apply to existing bed and breakfast businesses that would require this use to function in the traditional intended manner, where rooms do not have exterior doors and hosts serve breakfast to guests in a common kitchen for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I'll second this.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Further discussion?
I'd just like to be clear, does this mean that we're basically going back to where we were before this was voted on?
It sounds like it, yeah.
All right, taking it back to the beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Seriously, you want to go back to the beginning? Okay, that carries.
Tyler's got a.
Mr. Brown?
Just to be clear, I don't think this is intended to go back to the it would simply be that if bed and breakfast is a permitted use, it must, yeah, I understand there was some changes there made. But if bed and breakfast was a permitted use, it would have to function like a bed and breakfast as originally intended. The first motion that my recommendation that council passed here tonight would be changes that would allow short-term use in either a secondary suite or an ADU. So it's just saying that if there is a bed and breakfast use, and if that's something that's going to be contemplated in a zone, it absolutely has to function like the intended use and wouldn't be the way it was being or has been used at times, where it's 3 separate units accessed from exterior doors. So just want to be very clear on that.
So if I have a bed and breakfast, my guest has to come and go through my front door, allowing my cat to get out in the middle of the night and never to be seen again. None of it makes sense for me on this particular one. I'm sorry. But it is what it is. We'll carry on.
Mako has a
Councillor Noel?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I wish that we kind of talked a little bit about them. We're kind of moving them along, and but anyways, it is what it is. I don't think there's any consistency here. So, but again, there's some people, you may not want to lose your cat, but there's some people, just the sheer design of their home is going to just allow it that the guests are going to come in. Some people don't want to spend $200,000 to rejig their place in order to make a bed and breakfast. So again, that's a question, I guess. We called this a question and voted on it. That's correct? That
Yes.
decision's done?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I just want to chime in and just say, like, look, this is another option for people to run a bed and breakfast if they got a 3-bedroom home and they want a couple people to come in. I don't think it's our prerogative to make comments about how they're going to run their businesses. There's a couple people on the table that run nightly rentals, and the reality is, if there's a couple people in the community that would like to run a traditional bed and breakfast and make a brand muffin and have conversations and read Shirley Barton's book, I think that's okay. Again, that is creating a lifestyle and an opportunity for them to go in there. To say that that is not going to be accepted, I think that this evolved into something that its intent has kind of got off the rails a little bit. So I think that there are some people that would like to be able to have some brand muffins and talk about town and bring in maybe a few $100s in the evening for their room. So I don't want to discourage that. I know for a lot of people think that's crazy, but there's probably a few people in the town that actually like that lifestyle. So, that for me, that's kind of my 2 bits on that one.
Yeah, that's fine. I understand that. This says that all future bed and breakfasts have to have their guests walk in their front door and be served muffins.
Yeah, perfect. And you know what? Town was a little bit easier that way because we don't have the extreme that we have right now. So again, we're going from left to right. It is what it is. The decision's been made. But thank you.
Can I jump in with a quick?
Councillor Anderson?
I don't know if this is a question for Nancy or Aaron or Tyler, but can we just get a definition? I just make sure we're all on the same page of bed and breakfast and short-term rental and where that one ends and the other one starts.
Sure, I'll ask Mr. Penner or Ms. Henderson to jump in here in a moment, but yeah, I think there's a distinction to be made here, and what this particular motion is trying to get at is that. So for example, motion 1 talks about permitting a short-term rental unit in either a secondary suite or an ADU. So allowing that nightly rental in that type of unit. Motion 5 is really intended to say that someone does have the option to actually run a traditional bed and breakfast if they so want to. But I'll go to Mr. Penner or Ms. Henderson if they have anything to add on that. So it's not, just to be clear, it's not one or the other. It's just saying someone could run a bed and breakfast if that becomes a defined use in the zoning bylaw.
Excellent. And just a really quick question before they jump in is, if someone right now that lives in a single family R1 zone that has the ability to have up to 3 short-term rentals in their single family home at this point, would those be considered bed and breakfast? Or would those be considered at this point with the current zoning short-term rental?
I think that would be a question for around motion 6, and it's around taking stock of how those units were built, and how they were intended. We can do that through the business licensing data, and then developing the site-specific exemptions if that's council's prerogative. So we're not. This is that conversation around not zoning someone into an illegal, pulling the rug out from them. So. That is a little more nuanced question that would require drilling down on a site-by-site basis. So that's a process that's already been started, but we're not quite there yet. So Aaron or Nancy, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I might add just through the mayor to Councillor Anderson. So yeah, we're trying to think about the feature scenario on a parcel that doesn't currently have any form of bed and breakfast on it. What should be permitted on that parcel? And the first options, the motions 1 through 4, those would allow for 1 short-term rental unit in a secondary suite or an ADU where applicable, or just a secondary suite where not applicable. And then motion 5 is kind of a way to continue to still allow somebody on that lot to have a traditional bed and breakfast if they so desired. But the main change is that the way the motions are written, and please give us direction if otherwise, is that on those parcels that don't currently have a bed and breakfast use, they wouldn't be able to have the bed and breakfast use that's permitted today, where you could essentially have 3 separate short-term rental units that are technically considered a bed and breakfast unit under a bed and breakfast room under the zoning bylaw today. So that's the way things were intended to be put together. And Nancy, feel free to jump in if I'm misinterpreting.
Just further to Aaron, yeah, no, I mean, I think we all agree that the idea of having 3 separate short-term rentals that are accessed from the exterior of a house is not intended to be the continued form of short-term rentals in the community moving forward. And, if we're wrong in that assumption, please let us know. But what we wanted to do is create zoning that would allow short-term rentals in, the suite or the ADU, to provide people options, that also were safe and met building code separation and so on. Hopefully would also help legalize, existing secondary suites, but not kind of create these single-family housing, situations with sort of a bit of a 3-room hotel, as part of it. But let us know if we've maybe misinterpreted something there.
I think for me, the way it's worded is that this does not apply to existing bed and breakfast, but moving forward, anybody wanting a bed and breakfast has to establish it this way, with people coming in the main door and being served breakfast. That's the way I read this. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it.
I think you're right, Marilyn, but I think that the way that I'm not trying to editorialize here, but I think what you are advocating for would be a separate zoning that would allow someone to have 3 STRs on their property. And what this amendment or what this draft amendment is saying is that if you want to rent out 3 separate rooms to 3 separate people, you have to do it this way. You can't do it by having 3 STRs on one lot in one property. And if that's what council wants, then I guess we have to tell these guys to draft another motion that says that we will consider a zoning that allows 3 short-term rentals on one property, which is not covered in any of the other recommendations.
So I guess the stickler is the bed and breakfast versus short-term rental, the definition of those two things. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So, obviously we haven't gone into full-on drafting, but you can imagine that the zoning will, when it talks about a short-term rental, that will be very specific, and it will be based on those first motions. If the zoning would allow a short-term rental in either a secondary suite or an ADU, that would be a different use from bed and breakfast, which would be very defined, like that old school bed and breakfast of. And so it's not to say that if someone developed a short-term rental that they have to come through your front door. It's just in those cases where someone's wanting to rent out rooms in their main principal dwelling as a bed and breakfast. It would have to be, through the front, or the access would have to be in a way that they're not these individualized 3 units that has occurred in certain places. So would be 2 sort of distinct uses, and then fully acknowledging that there is development that has occurred where bed and breakfast is accessed through an exterior door on those existing parcels. That's why we're recommending as a final motion there, or final recommendation, that we draft. The zoning bylaw accounts for that. So those properties that are operating that way aren't finding themselves in a situation now where they're no longer zoning compliant.
Okay, so I sort of motion 6 is helping motion 5.
It's only, so motion 6 protects the existing development patterns that have occurred. Motion 5 is intended to, if bed and breakfast is something that council and the community does want to see, that it's treated in a way that there's no clever loopholes that are sort of exploited, and then taken with the other ones, that there is opportunity for nightly rentals that do have their individual units that don't have people coming through your front door.
Okay, so this is just adding to the options.
Correct.
Okay, I feel better now.
Yeah, it's just, and that's
The cat is safe.
that's the beauty of, I think, or getting Nancy and Aaron Urban Systems to do this is it's all about increasing options and not putting on restrictions. And I like that. And I think we're going to see that clarity when this comes back to us, because it is, we've been living in a world where we don't understand the difference between short-term rental and bed and breakfast, and things got kind of mixed up there. And so I think I think everything here is above board. It's what we want. And there's also, I think, Nancy, you're right in the sense that to have the original three, maybe I think it's one of those things where there's a current state where if we're having a really hard time getting people in homes, and we focus on, like like Councillor Noel said, when we have a new affordable housing a block coming up, then that's great, and we can start to retool things later. But as it stands right now, I think this makes sense, and we definitely grandfather like the people that are doing this for sure, and not impose, like they can't use an exterior door or something like that. But I do agree that maybe we need to be a bit careful moving forward, because in lieu of not having short or affordable housing right now, and short-term rentals are growing quite quickly, then that is a balance that we have to find. So I would also love to be able to have the flexibility later on to come back and address this once we get that balance right, and people want to continue to do those things. And in the event that we do start to see people that are like want to have a job at the school or something like that, and they find that they just can't afford to live here, then I think that's one of those things that we have to come back and address and look at it. But in any case, we're making this motion for them to draft it and for us to review it and have the public review it. So I don't think there's a harm here. We're not lowering the guillotine here on anything, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it seemed to me that we were just going backwards on this one. That's all.
Right.
But I get it now.
I just want to very briefly just
Talk
address
about my cat.
No. Just address two things that that Councillor Anderson just said about affordable housing and about short-term rentals and about not getting affordable housing. It's not council's prerogative, nor is it possible for council to regulate the amount of affordable housing in the community. We don't develop. So all we can do is hope and pray for it and grease the rails when someone comes to town. And you say that, we're getting too many short-term rentals. That is 100% council's purview. It's only council that decides how many short-term rentals there are. If council decided that there should be none, we could do that. And if council decided that every single property should have 15 short-term rentals or be eligible for it, we could decide that too. So to weigh those two things is fine, but we should weigh them fully understanding that one of them is completely outside of our control and the other one is completely within our control. And so when I say, when I see this pie chart that says that basically 66% of the community thinks that the number of short-term rentals is higher than it should be or right, to my mind, that's an indication to me, if I want to represent the majority of the community, that's who I should be listening to, not necessarily the 10% who'd like to see more. And when it comes to affordable housing, I think most people would like to see affordable housing, but that's outside of our control. So it's not an argument. It's not a criticism. I think it's just an important consideration.
No, that's a good point. But the 66% is not of the community. It's of the people that attended the open house and completed the survey.
That's true. 66% of respondents. That's
Yeah.
correct.
Right. I just think that's important as well.
Yeah. Great. I think there's some devil in the details with short-term rental too. And the fact that, you could have 3 in a single family house, and maybe there has been, I don't want to say abuse of that, but I think that this is what we're flushing out here, is to figure out what that number is and how we can make sure that we have housing that people may need that short-term rental in order to get by and do this. And we make sure that works. But at the same time, we don't want to overdo it. I get that. But this is the nuance that we're going to be, I think, hopefully flushing out here.
All right, we'll move on to number 6.
I will lastly move that council direct staff to ensure that existing short-term rentals operating with a business license are grandparented in the zoning bylaw refresh to mitigate potential financial impacts to property owners for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Further discussion?
I would quickly say that I support this and I'd vote in favor of it, but I think it should be as of this calendar date, because what I would like to avoid is a situation where we sort of telegraph an intent to possibly reconsider this, and then that leads a whole bunch of people to come and say, oh, do you know what, I'd like to apply for a business license, preemptively perhaps. So if we say that we're going to support this, and I think we should support it as of the date that we vote on it. And so whatever is grandparented in refers only to business licenses that are issued and that are valid as of today's date.
The way it's worded, the end of it says for the purposes of future public consultation and council consideration. So I think this one has to be treated just like the other 5.
I disagree. I think that for the purposes of future consultation and consideration, we take the number of existing business licenses as of this date. Because if we don't, then it's kind of moot. If we say that we're going to take business licenses that have been granted at a future date, I think that that's going to prompt a number of people to preemptively request business licenses.
Well, that's like putting a tree bylaw in place and everybody cuts down all their trees the day before it goes into effect. I mean, you can't predict that. You just can't. People are people.
But you can control against it. If you say as of today's date, then it.
That's not the way it's worded.
I think they're just looking for direction, which way to go here. It's like, so the urban systems is just trying to get a vibe of, this is what they came up with. Like, can we just flush this out and see what you think? Because we're not voting on anything right now, just to give them, and they're getting your direction. I know.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's like I'm here to speak my piece, as we all are. So that's my feedback. That's my direction. I support this, but I think that that's an important caveat to consider.
Well, you'll have to vote on the way it's currently worded. It's been moved and seconded.
Well, okay, in that case, I'd like some clarity on what exactly that means when it says short-term rentals operating with a business license. As of when?
Mr. Brown?
Yes, I think we thinking on the fly here, so just want to preface my comments with that. It would be difficult to implement this with a specific date targeted, because the changes that we're contemplating ultimately would require bylaw changes. And so I'm just trying to think this through about if we could potentially do that or not. I'm not sure that we could without the bylaw reading. So
and it would require a public hearing as well.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think this through, and I think it might be problematic if we were to implement it on a certain date. It would automatically happen once council has read, if we have this direction, once we have the bylaws read and things like that. But Ms. Henderson?
Maybe just to add to Mr. Brown, I mean, once council gets to the point that you have bylaws in process, it is possible to withhold, say, like building permits from being issued, which isn't the same as business licenses, but building permits from being issued because you have bylaws in process. There's some time limitations and process associated with it. I have seen that happen before, but we're not quite at that stage yet. But it's something that we could consider as we move closer to bylaw preparation, should council be worried that additional units are going to come forward.
I would just add to that, the thing with the bylaw readings is they are on a public agenda and published. So folks do have to, if there is a regulatory change like that, in theory, they have the opportunity to make their
viewpoints
known before. And so I'm just trying to think, if I'm not sure that we would be at that state that we could contemplate that and be in a procedurally an okay place to do that.
Thank you.
All right. Any further comments? Councillor Hoare?
I'm just going to say that I totally hear you, Councillor Mafty. Like, we saw the rush for business licenses happen the last time we made changes prior to all of this. So I think we need to be conscious of that, but it is early stage of the process. So, but we need to be conscious of that going forward for sure.
That's worth bringing up, actually. Just because Aaron and Nancy and Tyler
weren't here
for that. So what happened at one point? There was a new bed and breakfast bylaw put in, bylaw 1310, I think. And what happened is it was sort of done quickly. and there wasn't a lot of public engagement on it. And what ended up happening is I believe that there was like a lineup of people
There was.
that had rooms that they intended on, maybe during the retirement, they were going to STR later, but they weren't doing it now. And basically it said that if you don't have a business license, you're not part of the grandfathering club. And that obviously, was a nightmare. So I think that's the residual, what you're talking about there. Just as a historical sort of background there.
Once bitten, twice shy.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Might it not be prudent then collectively to vote against this, to leave that discussion for a later date? Because it seems that if we initially, I was like, I'd like to vote for this if we can have a timestamp, and I understand why that's not feasible. But at this point, if we vote in favor of it, we're still pushing that decision down the road, but we're very likely gonna trigger a similar rush to get business licenses. So I don't understand that it's in anyone's interest, that it's in, I don't know. I don't see who it benefits at this point for us to vote yes on this. Even if we want existing licenses to be grandparented in, we can vote for that later. But to do it now is going to trigger a rush that benefits nobody. So if we collectively decide that could be problematic, then I think we should all vote against this and essentially defer the decision to a later date and avoid creating a sense of, I better go get a business license now.
But I think this motion is protecting the previous motion.
No, I don't think so. How so? All this is all the way that correct me if I'm wrong, but I only see number 6 as saying that anyone who has a license is going to be considered valid in the refresh of the bylaws. But at this point, if we still haven't officially voted on these bylaws, if they still need to go out to public consultation, by voting on this in a sense that says anyone who has a license will be grandfathered in, people who don't have licenses would be motivated to go out and get them. Whereas if we say, no, we're not going to vote on this, that doesn't mean that we can't make that decision later on down the road. So I don't see it as protecting anything.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you. Mayor, the intention of this motion is really to give us a sense of where council's at. If council said, no, we want to make sure that existing short-term rental operators under the current configuration is not something that's desirable in the community, we would then not spend the effort in crafting the zone and identifying those parcels to make sure that whatever zone falls on those parcels or is contemplated on those parcels isn't putting them into a situation where they're no longer zoning compliant. So the intention really, from our perspective, was just to get a sense of council's direction on that. And as we move forward, making sure that we're crafting the zoning bylaw with those existing properties in mind. Ultimately, council may get the zoning bylaw and decide not to proceed or not to proceed with aspects of it, and we'll pull that out. But if this is, like I said, just to give us a sense of, do we spend energy doing that exercise, identifying those parcels and crafting potential options to make sure that they're grandfathered, or do we not, because council's direction is that they simply won't have protection?
Yeah, I just feel that this is part of, this 6th one is part of all the others that are to go out for more public consultation and
Yeah.
more consideration.
And I get what you're saying totally. I mean, I think that this was meant to be a protection in place for people that have what they have now. But I see what you're saying. I definitely get it. But I think what the idea might be, like the nuance here would be that when Nancy and Aaron go back and look at this, they're hearing what you're saying, and they don't want to have like this sort of horse race to do this. Like there would have to be something in there that said, okay, this applies to newer builds, or, people that, haven't even bought here yet, or something like, a new upcoming development. But at the same time, if there was going to be something about changing people who have been living here, say for 10 years, and then they may do STRs in a year or two, that's what we're getting at, I think, is that nuance, that there would have to be some sort of allotment so that there wasn't going to be like a big milk run on all all these things in one day. I know what you're saying. I think that's something that has to be worked out, because I think the intention of this isn't to do that. It's to protect the people that are already making a living or supporting their living, and they're paying their mortgage by doing this.
I get it, but we're not protecting anybody at this point. All we're doing is encouraging that milk run. We're not taking anyone's protection away if we vote against this. If we vote this down, nobody's losing anything that they currently have. If we vote this in, all it's going to do potentially is defer the eventual decision on who might get grandparented to a later date, and in the meantime prompt people to go out and get business licenses preemptively, which is beyond our control. People are going to do that whether we want them to or not, whether we tell them they need to or not. People are going to be like, well, I better protect my interests. So all I'm saying is that by voting against this, nobody loses anything. The only thing that we can ensure is that we're not encouraging people to go out and get business licenses. And I don't see that as a loss to anybody.
If we can get some clarity on that. Is that the case? Maybe Nancy or Aaron might have a thought on that. If we, do you find that that's the situation that we're in? If we didn't vote or voted against this, are we maintaining a status quo, or is this just to set up what a grandfather might look like, or is there a ramification here? I think that Councillor Mafti has a good point that we might end up with a big run on people trying to get licenses. Do you guys have any experience or thoughts on that?
Through the chair, I think I'm not sure that the building department would be approving these dwellings with 3 exterior access run like a mini hotel, if you will, at this stage anyway, in terms of running for building permits or business licensing at this stage. I also think that council's direction that you've provided already is like really great indication for us without passing the motion. If there's concern with passing 6, I don't think that it necessarily adds to it unless council wants to do more consultation on that particular point, like whether or not those properties should be grandfathered or not, unless you wanted to give us direction. But if you just want to like leave it open for future consideration, at this stage, we don't have any concerns with that. I think the comments have spoken volumes already.
Thank you for that.
I would just add, Mayor, if it's okay, I understand the concern here, but I do think the time it would take someone to put together a building permit application to allow the type of the way the bed and breakfast has been used, to have that go through the building permit process and the building license process would be longer than these bylaws should be coming back to you. So from the comments, I would agree with Ms. Henderson. We're hearing that we do want to protect the existing owners. And if we're wrong in that, please let us know, because that will shape how we go about drafting this. But that's the comments that I've made note of here, and it's simply intended to formalize that. If council's not comfortable formalizing that direction, we will likely be bringing that forward back through those bylaws, because that's what we understand council's direction is based on the comments.
I think our wish is to protect those existing businesses. And so if this motion is what is required to do that, then that, I guess we need to do it. Well, I guess we need to vote on it.
Again, this is just for consultation as well, right? This is, we're not, I don't think that.
We're not finalizing
We're not
anything.
right. And again, the devil's in the details and the nuance. In my mind, I'm thinking to myself, you've got a couple that have, 3 kids, that have left. So there's 3 extra rooms in the house, and they've been living here for, 40 years. And they decide that, maybe they want a short-term rental those suites after their kids are gone. I'm just, outside of the building permit sort of realm, but this is the kind of detail that gets a little, gets people running down to to the district office trying to buy a license, even though they might not want to do it for 5 years or something. But yeah, but that's something I think Nancy and Aaron are picking up exactly what we're all thinking.
I think so. Okay, so don't know what happened to my sound. It's really weird. So we have a motion that we should vote on. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Whew, okay.
It's a good debate. I think it's great. I think it's like we're representing the people that we've spoken to in town, and I think that's, you know, we've got a lot of different viewpoints here.
Yes, Mayor, if I could skip before you introduce the next one, is just say, just thanks council again. It's, we mentioned, and then thanks Aaron and Nancy. I know you've got other things you have to do, so thank you so much for your time and everything. But we knew as we went into this, there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting, and tonight was one of those nights. And there'll be a number of more nights coming up as we go through this bylaw refresh. There's a lot of details in it, so
Yeah,
we appreciate that, and we'll have some. We're just going to promise you some more late nights like this.
We knew this one would be a heavy lifting one for sure.
Yep, but that does provide staff and the consultants some direction of which way we're. And this is all about direction as we draft these.
All right. The last report is titled Appointment of Chief and Deputy Chief Election Officers, and it will be presented by Mr. Harding, our CAO.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm not sure if you know, but about 6.5 months from now, there's an election.
We know.
I'm not sure if that's exciting or concerning, but it's coming up fast. And so with that, we need to appoint a chief and deputy election officer. And I'd like to recommend council that you appoint Mr. Chow as the chief election officer and Florence Palshaw as the deputy election officer. And we can answer any questions you have about the process coming up and how we're getting prepared for it. But that would be our recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Harding? Seeing none, there's one recommendation.
I'd be happy to move that council appoint Ed Chow as chief election officer and Florence Palshaw as deputy chief election officer for the purpose of administering the 2026 general local election for the district of Ucluelet.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed. That carries. Are there any notices of motion? We do have one motion for which notice was given. And that is Councillor Noel.
I'll take that one if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
Okay, the council directs staff to engage with local school district, Strong Start program providers, and relevant community organizations to explore opportunities to improve access to childcare and early years support in Ucluelet. And secondly, identify potential options to better utilize existing spaces, programs, and partnerships, including opportunities to align program availability with the needs of the working families. And thirdly, report back to council with findings, potential partnership models, and any resource implications.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
Second that.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Further discussion?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just one quick minute there. I do appreciate that. This is very timely here because, you know, at the council table, we don't talk about this too much. We talk about more housing, and tonight it was kind of timely on page 30 with Marcy DeWitt's presentation. There was one line that really kind of caught forward with me there. Sorry, just want to read it out loud there, just to just the importance of this this motion here. It highlighted the need for additional local and provincial interventions to access early educator sector to recruit and retain these professionals in the new spaces and for families. I think that again, I know that our new interim CEO Richard, he's has some experience with this. There's a lot of different things we can do. We're adding more housing. We need more children's spaces. So I think it's very timely that we move this forward, and I look forward to staff's report. And thanks for who seconded that for me. And I want to say thank you for that.
Councillor
Thank you,
Anderson.
Mr. Anderson. You're always there for me. I appreciate that.
Got you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, that carries. Thank you for that. We have no correspondence. Mayor's announcements. I'd like to wish Richard Harding a happy 1-year anniversary today. 1 year ago today, he started with the District of Ucluelet. And we're very pleased to have you, and thank you for all you've done for us so far.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been a long time since I've been 1 year old in anything. So this is very good. It's been a real joy to work for council and the community for this 1 year.
Thank you, Richard. And I also wanted to wish again Chief Geddes and all the best in Kamloops with his new position. We did that last night at the Committee of the Whole meeting, or was Committee of the Whole meeting? Yeah. But just wanted to put that out on officially. So council committee reports, Councillor Anderson.
All right, thank you. I'll try and be quick. Hey, speaking of grandfathering, someone's a new grandfather over here. 2 times, yeah. Congratulations. That's terrific. But what I'll save the special community stuff for you guys. But I had a meeting. We both had internet problems that one day. It was last Thursday, the 26th. We have the Accelerating Community Energy Transformation Group that's helping us with develop a feasibility for wave energy. What we would ideally call later the Ucluelet Energy Center, and be able to harness some offshore renewable marine power. So just in that vein of figuring out what this means, we had some early engagement with the Toquat Nation and also the Ucluelet Thought. So meeting with the YFN on Thursday with their CAO Sunny Dollywall, Spencer Tucci, and Carrie Cunningworth that we know from archaeology. That was a great meeting. Our CIO, Richard, you were there for that. So that was great to get some feedback. And I did get a follow-up message. I think they're still looking into it, but we did get a follow-up message. And then I think the benefit to both communities is definitely high. And the idea, like, when probably disproportionate amount of time that they're without power after a power outage. And I believe with the way that the battery setup is projected, that would be a thing of the past. So yeah, that's a really interesting conversation. You get started in an economic development sense. They are really interested in collaborating with us. So I think that's a win all around. The next day was a meeting that what was the meeting on the next day? Oh, I had to look at some of the potential financing for economic development, things that we might be interested in the town. I met up with, ironically, through ACHN, Marcy DeWitt and the Alberta Clayoquot Health Network. They had a group from Tamarack to put out a call for applied research for social financing opportunities with the SRDC. I can't remember what SRDC stands for. I should look that up. But I had a 1-hour interview with them to talk about Community Finance Summit in Winnipeg, where, as far as I understand it, it's a group of philanthropists and donors that put together some pretty large amounts of money. And if you come up with a great idea that benefits a community, ideally more than one community, then there's some funds there that we could potentially get. So it looks like we're moving on to round 2 on that one. So I'll keep that one on the radar. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Hoare.
All right. Last week we had a very busy public hearing, special council meeting on the 24th. On the 25th, there was a great open house on the Hard Sports facility. Lots of attendance. I don't know what the number was, but lots of interesting conversations, and it was really nice to see other options put forward. Everybody seemed to think that what was presented to us originally was the only option, but it was always just a concept. So nice to see the other ones. We had last night's committee of the whole on the fire hall. So it's been all about fire and emergency services, which is always great. And I just wanted to point out, give a shout out today. It's the International Transgender Day of Visibility. I actually heard an interview with Sully, I believe it's Regulski, but I might get their name wrong, and I apologize for that in advance. But they did a fabulous interview on the CBC yesterday, and they were doing an event in Tofino last night around the Monday night movie, Clayoquot theater movie. But it's all about just, they're out there, and we all have friends that are transgender, and the fact that the IOC recently came out saying that transgender athletes are not allowed to compete at the next Olympics in LA just does not please me. So I'm just wanted to make sure that we said, we see you, we know you're here, and keep being loud and proud.
Thanks, Councillor Hoare. Councillor Mafty?
Attended the same special council open house committee of the whole that Councillor Hoare referred to. I thought the open house was interesting. Talked to lots of people. Very gratified that at least the vibe in the room while I was there was I think a lot of people that had initially reached out were sort of like, what do you mean you're taking the dog park away? And the people that showed up were I found much more curious and constructive, and sort of like, oh, okay, all right. So this is the point at which we can submit our input. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I was only there for a little bit, but I had several very interesting conversations, and a lot of people, not a lot of people, but a few people brought material and handed stuff out, and that level of engagement is fantastic. I've often complained that sometimes we make decisions that seem quite consequential with minimal input, and it's very gratifying to feel that people care. And same thing with the special meeting. Anytime you get people showing up and people writing in and correspondence, it's great to see people taking an interest in how the government works and their role in it. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor Mafty. Councillor Noel?
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
All right. For me, March 18th was the Tourism Ucluelet board meeting. And just a note that they're holding their AGM April 8th at Blackrock from 7 till 9, if anybody wants to attend that. March 19th, I met with our new RCMP sergeant, Toby Jennings. Got to know him a little bit, so that was great. And he also attended today at the water treatment facility groundbreaking event too. So that was, yeah, you forgot about that. On March 24th was the special council meeting with 4 public hearings. Lots of people attending for that. March 25th, I had a Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board meeting. We adopted the 2026 to 2030 financial plan. And later that evening was the Hard Sports Facility open house, and there were over 100 people that signed into that. So that's pretty good attendance for sure. March 30th, yesterday was our committee of the whole meeting with 4 fire department reports, including a location for the new fire hall, or I guess potential locations. And then today at 11 was the water treatment facility groundbreaking event, and the weather was beautiful for it, so that was a bonus.
And you got to climb into an excavator.
I got to climb into an excavator, but I wasn't allowed to take it anywhere. So we're now moving on to question period. This is an opportunity for the public to ask questions and comment on matters within council's jurisdiction. Oh, we lost our one audience member, I see. Representations about bylaws that council is prohibited from holding a public hearing on or bylaws that were subject to a public hearing are not permitted at this time. There are no audience members. Ms. Pelchat, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom
No, Mayor.
or telephone?
Neither.
And have we received any emails to community@ucluelet.ca?
We have not.
Okay, so I will move at 7:18 that the March 31st, 2026 regular council meeting be closed to the public pursuant to the following sections of the community charter. 90(1)(a), personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. 90(1)(c), labor relations or other employee relations. 90(1)(e), the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements, if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. 90(1)(g), litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. All in favor? None opposed. That carries. Ran out of breath.
Councillor Noel, I'm just gonna end this webinar and start the closed session, which